in the coming years.
Stephen Gethin.
Diolch, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, in the 2011 SNP manifesto, the SNP committed to have 100% equivalent of Scotland's electricity being generated from renewables. The SNP met that target and then some, thanks to the devolution of the Crown Estate and working with industry that is now delivering jobs and clean green energy to Scotland, but also throughout the UK. Why shouldn't Wales have the same opportunity?
I'm afraid I'm not going to take any lectures on the Crown Estate from his party, whose mismanagement of the Scottish seabed has seen Scottish assets sold off on the cheap. We are focused on doing whatever it takes to secure more than 5,000 jobs in Wales and billions of pounds of investment that the Crown Estate can unlock for Wales.
Tony Antoniazzi.
Mr Speaker, does the Secretary of State agree with me that the government's priority should be ensuring that the Crown Estate can unlock thousands of new well-paid jobs in Wales that will come with floating offshore wind, rather than being distracted by calls to devolve the organisation in the middle of this national mission, risking the investment, jobs and lower energy bills Wales desperately needs?
Mr Speaker, she's absolutely right. I, like her, want to see people in Wales benefit from those 5,300 new jobs, particularly young people who then don't have to leave Wales, where they've grown up, to earn or learn. I want to see that £1.4 billion boost to the economy. We are not prepared to put all of that at risk, the risk of market fragmentation, of undermining or potentially destroying developer confidence in flow, and then have to watch that investment go elsewhere in the world.
John Cooper.
Question number 3, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. Well, with your permission, I will answer question 3 and question 8 together. I've spoken to farming unions in Wales and understand their strength of feeling. These changes are expected to affect around 500 claims across the whole of the UK, with very few being in Wales. Meanwhile, most importantly, we and the Welsh Government have protected the farming budget at its current level, whilst the Welsh Conservatives tried to block that money from reaching farmers by voting against the Welsh Government budget last week.
Mr Speaker, the Scotland Office is conducting a series of agricultural roundtables talking directly to farmers and putting together statistics to push back against this orthodoxy that only a tiny number of very wealthy estates are going to be affected. That's simply not the case. This increasingly looks like a war on farmers by the Treasury. What part are you playing in fighting back against this?
Well, Mr Speaker, the Treasury is absolutely confident in its figures, and specific questions on methodology is a matter for the Treasury. But what I can tell him, and I will repeat it, is expected to only affect 500 claims for agricultural property relief across the whole of the UK, with very few being in Wales. As he knows, we are absolutely committed to our farmers through keeping the £337 million block grant which Welsh Government has passed on to farmers directly.
Charlie Dewhurst.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Farmers across the UK have already been rocked by the changes to APR and BPR, and yesterday we had the shock news in England that DEFRA will take no new applications for SFI. So what reassurances can the Minister give to farmers in Wales that the Sustainable Farming Scheme will be delivered in full and on time on the 1st of January next year?
Well, as he knows, my good friend, the First Minister of Wales, has spent a lot of time talking to farmers, and we have absolutely protected the budget, and Welsh Government has also protected that budget for farmers, so the full £337 million will be going directly to farmers, in spite of his colleagues in the Sunday trying to block it last week.
Select Committee, Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Welsh Affairs Select Committee is launching its inquiry into farming in Wales this week because we know farming is a cornerstone of the Wales economy. Now, the Welsh Government budget contained over £300 million to support Welsh farmers. So does the Minister agree with me that it's a shame the opposition parties are playing fast and loose with farmers' livelihoods by voting against the Welsh Government budget last week?
Well, indeed, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend, the Chair of the Welsh Affairs Committee, is absolutely right. It was an utter disgrace that the parties opposite decided to vote against the budget last week, which effectively is trying to block money going to the farmers. What a disgrace.
Shall I Secretary State Mimsdale?
this government have said that they are concerned, like we all are, about our future security. So why is food security expendable in Wales and beyond? That's the message from farmer Stella Owen from NFU Cymru, who termed their actions as destructive and threatens the future of family farms across Wales. Mr. Speaker, how many of those family farms is the Minister prepared to see go under before she and the Secretary of State will step up and act in the interests of this key sector to help worried and frankly livid men and women who are worried and fearing for their livelihoods?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure she has been reminded many times, difficult decisions had to be made to fund our public services, but the changes still leave a significant amount of relief in place. Farming parents will typically be able to pass on up to £3 million to their children without paying any inheritance tax at all, and above this amount, inheritance tax will be paid at a reduced effective rate of up to 20% rather than the standard 40%. Estates have up to 10 years to pay any tax due, and this will be interest-free. These payment terms are not available to others. This is a fair and balanced approach that continues support for family farms, whilst also fixing the public services that we rely on, including farmers.
Jones.
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
I have regular discussions with my Welsh Government colleagues about health, and I'm pleased to see clear progress in cancer services in Wales. In December, performance against the 62 day cancer target was the best we've seen since August 2021. But no one should ever be complacent about cancer. And that is why our two governments are absolutely committed to working closely on cancer, to share best practice and to deliver better outcomes for patients across England and Wales.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since August 2020, not a single health board in Wales has met their cancer target, leaving patients waiting months for their referral to start treatment. And despite recommendations to properly implement screening programmes, the standard for uptake is not being achieved, leading to poorer health outcomes. As the Department of Health embark on developing a cancer strategy for England, how will the Secretary of State for Wales ensure these issues are not repeated in England?
Well, what I can tell him is that there is now positive progress on waiting lists. Both governments are working together in a spirit of genuine collaboration to cut NHS waiting lists and build an NHS fit for the future. The Welsh Government have committed more than £600 million in extra funding for health and social care in their budget for 25-26, and they're also setting up a National Cancer Leadership Board to improve cancer care. Thanks to these investments, the Welsh NHS services are improving, including on cancer, and waiting lists are falling.
Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my honourable friend outline how she is working in partnership with the Welsh Government to improve cancer and health outcomes? And could she try and help me understand why on earth, in the budget vote last week, the Conservatives and Plaid Cymru voted against £600 million more in our Welsh NHS?
I really cannot explain why the Conservative colleagues in the Senate voted against this budget, because not only is the Welsh Government delivering on £600 million, but they are also delivering a specific package on cancer care. And the initial phase, which is going to focus on breast, skin, gynecological, lower gastrointestinal and urological cancer, will improve productivity and efficiency in how health boards deliver care. And this includes sending people straight to test without an outpatient appointment. Alongside this, Welsh Government are implementing a wider range of service improvements, from reducing smoking and tackling obesity to HPV vaccination and diagnostic and genomic strategies.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wales has a world-class tourism offer. I fully support the work that Welsh Government is doing to support the tourism sector in Wales through Visit Wales and other initiatives. Last month, the UK Government announced a £15 million investment for Venue Cymru in Llandudno and the Newport Transporter Bridge. These are two key projects that will help boost the tourism and culture sector in Wales.
Thank her for her answer. The tourism and hospitality sector in the UK is one of the most heavily taxed in Europe. Will she press the Chancellor to reduce the tax burden in this area to help drive local economies that rely on tourism in Wales and in constituencies like mine on the Isle of Wight?
I would gently remind the gentleman opposite that his party in government put the highest tax burden in 70 years on the people and businesses of this country, leaving a £22 billion black hole that we have had to try and sort out.
Henry Tufnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More than 40 countries and holiday destinations around the world have introduced a form of visitor levy, including Greece, Amsterdam, Barcelona and California. So can the Secretary of State outline the work she is doing with the Welsh Government to support our vital tourism industry?
The honourable member has one of the most beautiful constituencies in Wales, and I know tourism is very critical for his local economy. Indeed, probably tourism remains the only way to see a Conservative MP in Wales after the general election. The visitor levy is set to raise up to £33 million for tourism sector across Wales. Last week, Conservatives in the Senedd voted to block £15.6 million in support for Welsh tourism.
So, Secretary of State Minister Davis.
Sadly, there will be no more Easter family fun at Oakwood. They've made it clear that their final demise after COVID was Labour's looming tourism tax, job tax and sky-high business rates from the Senedd, meaning it's all over. Mr. Speaker, how many more tourist and hospitality businesses need to tell the UK government that their closed signs will be going up and staying up due to decisions made by the Treasury? Will this Secretary of State stand up for businesses and jobs in Wales who know they are being taken for the worst ride possible, frankly even more vomit-inducing than megaphobia, by this government of broken promises?
Last week, her colleagues in the Senedd voted against extra money for tourism. They did. Now, maybe she should have a conversation with Darren Miller in the Senedd, her colleague, but I don't think they're having that sort of conversation at the moment because they're still arguing about who's leading the Tories in Wales.
Douglas McAllister.
Question number 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I regularly meet with the First Minister to discuss a wide range of matters, including NHS waiting lists. The latest data shows positive progress in reducing long waiting times and the size of the waiting list, thanks to investment by both the UK and Welsh governments.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm appalled to hear that Plaid Cymru voted against £600 million extra investment to bring down NHS waiting lists in Wales. But I'm afraid to say this is a familiar story for us Scottish members. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that nationalist parties will always prioritise niche constitutional distractions over delivering priorities for working families, what they need and what they deserve?
Mr. Speaker, I couldn't agree more with my honourable friends, and Plaid Cymru members are going to have to explain to their constituents why they voted against £600 million extra for the NHS last week, blocking crucial funding, reaching our hospitals, NHS staff and patients in Wales.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, Minister, one of the issues for the waiting lists in Wales, as it is in all of the United Kingdom, are those who have been waiting for diabetes diagnosis, number one, and then the treatment. There used to be in Westminster a strategy that encompassed just not England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Would the Minister support a similar strategy for the 4 regions together to address the issue of diabetes and what it's doing to this country?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Can I just say nations and regions rather than just regions? But I'm very happy to have a discussion with him outside the chamber about that.
Graham Ledbetter.
Question number 7, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Our United Kingdom is going from strength to strength and is underpinned by a transformed relationship between the UK and devolved governments. In Wales, this means a partnership between our two governments, which is delivering on the issues that matter most to people, on reforming the NHS and public services and attracting investment and new jobs through free ports, investment zones and our industrial strategy.
Thank you. Thank Minister for that answer. Today the Senate will vote on a motion to redesignate HS2 as an England-only project. Previous calculations suggest that Wales missed out on around £4 billion from the project, but Welsh ministers now claim that amount is £431 million. Quite the difference. With the Welsh Government abandoning its ambitions and the UK Government refusing to budge on full consequential funding, is the Labour Party now waving the white flag on Wales missing billions?
Well, the government absolutely acknowledges that the previous Conservative government shortchanged Wales for years on rail investment, including because of HS2. And one of our top priorities is to reverse those years of historic underfunding in Wales. This is infrastructure. So the Secretary of State met the Transport Secretary and Welsh Government Transport Minister Ken States immediately before Christmas, where they agreed on a direction of travel which we hope will deliver new investment for rail in Wales. The UK and Welsh governments have agreed a prioritisation of rail improvement projects developed by the Wales Rail Board. This will inform our respective departments' work in the run-up to the spring spending review.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Investment into Wales by the UK Government demonstrates the strength of the Union, and I was therefore delighted to see the UK Labour Government announce its plan for neighbourhoods that will see £100 million invested in Welsh communities, with £20 million of that going into my constituency of Wrexham, straight into vital local resources like high streets and youth clubs. Will the Secretary of State agree with me that this Labour Government is committed to bringing growth to areas of Wales that were previously ignored by the party opposite?
Well, indeed, with UK Government and Welsh Government working together, we've secured more than £1.5 billion investment and hundreds of jobs in Wales. And, of course, we've established those investment in zones in Cardiff, Newport, Wrexham and Flintshire to provide a rocket boost to sector strengths like advanced manufacturing.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Question number 9.
Minister.
UK Government has delivered the biggest budget settlement in the history of devolution, with £21 billion of new money for the Welsh Government. The Welsh Government is investing almost £200 million this year to support school standards across Wales, plus a further almost £170 million next year. But his Welsh Conservative colleagues tried to block this funding by voting against the Welsh Government budget last week.
Sir Ashley Fox.
I'm grateful, Mr Speaker. Children in Wales have the lowest PISA scores in the United Kingdom and are significantly below the OECD average. Does the Minister believe this could be related in any way to 26 years of Labour government in Wales?
Well, I'll take no lectures from the party opposite. The Conservative attack rings absolutely hollow, given the chronic underfunding of education and public services for the last 14 years when they have been in power. Now, the UK and Welsh governments are working together to ensure every young person has the opportunity to succeed, including by investing over £260 million extra in education and more than £260 million for local government who set school budgets in Wales. In spite of the shenanigans of Plaid and the Conservatives voting against the Welsh Government's budget, Labour are getting on and delivering certainty and support for teachers across Wales through increases to education and local authority budgets.
Jill German, final question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does my right honourable friend welcome, as I do, the additional £20 million announced by Welsh Government last week to improve education standards, on top of the £262 million extra in total for education in Wales? And is she as perplexed as I am as to why the Conservatives and Plaid Cymru voted against extra money for education in the Welsh budget?
Well, like her, I'm absolutely astounded the way that the Plaid Cymru and Conservative Senate members voted against the budget. But the important thing is that this year the Welsh Government will be investing an additional £1.1 million for literacy, numeracy and science support in schools. And we've also, the Welsh Government's also announced investment of a £10 million package on literacy and numeracy for the coming year, increasing local capacity to support schools, national support programmes and interventions to support struggling learners.
Right, that completes Welsh questions. We now come to questions to the Prime Minister. Mike Martin.
Question number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the progress in talks between Ukraine and the United States. We must now redouble our efforts to get a lasting, secure peace. And, Mr. Speaker, on Saturday, I'll convene international leaders to discuss how we can make further progress. Can I also pay tribute to the bravery and dedication of all those responding to the ship collision off the East Yorkshire coast? Our thoughts, and I'm sure of the whole House, are with the family of the crew member who is sadly presumed dead. Mr. Speaker, this week we introduced landmark legislation to get Britain building, paving the way to restoring the dream of home ownership for working people across the country. We're also driving forward our Employment Rights Bill, the biggest boost to workers' rights in a generation. That's our plan for change in action. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Russia has abducted at least 19,000 Ukrainian children and transferred them to Russia. They have been told that their parents don't love them, they've been placed in Russian homes, and they have been re-educated. For this despicable crime and others, the International Criminal Court has issued 6 arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin and his gang. I note the Prime Minister's previous fulsome support for the ICC, and I also note his comments just last night about the support that the UK will offer to Ukraine in achieving a just and lasting peace. Will the Prime Minister confirm to the House that British peacekeeping troops will only be deployed to Ukraine if the peacekeeping deal includes both the return of Ukraine's children and Putin's prosecution?
Well, Mr. Speaker, firstly, I thank him for raising this issue because it is an absolutely terrible case of abduction and kidnapping. And when we say a lasting, just settlement or peace in Ukraine, it must, of course, involve dealing with this issue, and we are, as he would expect, raising it continually with our allies.
On Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Telford and Britain voted for change in July. Yet this week we saw the bizarre spectacle of the Conservatives attempting to bring back the Rwanda policy, clinging onto a gimmick that cost the British taxpayers £700 million, yet only sent 4 volunteers to Rwanda. As Labour works to secure our borders through our plan for change, does the Prime Minister agree with me? It's quite clear the party opposite have done absolutely nothing.
Well, he's quite right. They ran an open borders experiment that saw numbers go up to almost 1 million. And the leader of the opposition was the cheerleader, thanking herself for the lobbying that she did. The Rwanda scheme, yes, Mr. Speaker, £700 million of taxpayers' money to remove 4 volunteers. What a contrast. We've got the flights off, 19,000 people removed who shouldn't be here. As with the NHS, with prisons, the economy, everything else, we're clearing up the mess that they lost.
Leader of the Opposition Kemi Badenoch.
Later today, the Prime Minister is meeting the family of Sir David Amess. Sir David gave this House and our country 40 years of service. I hope the Prime Minister will agree that getting the response to his murder right is vital, not just to his family, but to our democracy. Mr. Speaker, every week I speak to businesses who are letting go of staff or closing. Has the Prime Minister been given an estimate of how many people will lose their jobs because of his budget?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just on the question of Sir David, he was a deeply loved and respected colleague, and behind me is the plaque, as is the plaque to Joe Cox in front of me. And I know this was deeply felt by the House, but particularly, as I acknowledged at the time, by the party opposite, who lost a colleague and a friend in the most awful of circumstances. Mr. Speaker, I am meeting the Amess family later on today, and will make sure that they get answers to the questions that they ask. Mr. Speaker, in relation to businesses, I'm really pleased to say we've got thousands of new jobs into the economy. We've got more investment in the last 20 years, an absolute record. Wages are up higher than prices. 3 interest rate cuts, the best boost for the cost of living for a very long time.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to get out more. Inflation is up, and estimates of job losses are between 130,000 and 300,000. Okay. His tax rises are hurting every sector of the economy. Things are getting worse for nurseries. Nurseries are writing to stressed parents right now, telling them that fees will go up because of his jobs tax. Can he explain how more expensive childcare is good for the economy or for working families struggling to make ends meet?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're putting in childcare. Look at the breakfast clubs, 2 in her constituency. But she's rather forgetting the $22 billion black hole that they left, that we had to deal with. That's why we had to take the necessary but right measures we did in the budget. And what's her response? Not that she'd reverse them. Oh, no, she doesn't say that. She attacks what we've done, but she doesn't say she would reverse it because she wants all the benefits of our budget in returns of investment, but she doesn't want to pay for it. That's how we got into the mess in the first place.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is out of touch because he should know that nurseries are charging over £2,000 for full-time care. That's £24,000 a year after tax, and he's talking about 60p breakfast clubs. He has no idea what people out there are experiencing, and it is not just the families. Even councils must pay his jobs tax. To cope with it, the average council tax bill is increasing by over £100 in April, after he promised to freeze it. Hard-working families' money is going to the Chancellor instead of social care and fixing potholes. Why should these families pay more for less?
Well, she really shouldn't denigrate what she calls, I think, 60p breakfast clubs. She should be welcoming them. And she asked about council tax, Mr. Speaker. The Tories put up council tax every year for 12 years. Their manifesto, Tory LGA manifesto, government should remove the caps on council tax. And then Hampshire Council, Tory, wanted a 15% increase. We said no. Slough Council, again, Mr. Speaker, Tory, wanted 3%. We said no. Windsor and Maidenhead, Tory, now Lib Dem, wanted 25%. We said no. We're the ones that are doing the right things to get this country on the right track.
Mr. Speaker, the point is he promised to freeze, and they are going up. And if he wants to talk about councils, let's look at Liverpool or maybe Birmingham, where the rubbish is piling up so high, people vote Labour and all they get is trash, just like what he's saying at the dispatch box. People all over the country are suffering, not just in Birmingham. Millions of elderly people have had their winter fuel payments snatched away. At the same time, care home fees are set to go up by a devastating £3,000 because of his jobs tax. How does he expect pensioners on a fixed income to make ends meet?
Mr. Speaker, this is why it's so important that wages are up higher than prices. That's why it's so important that the interest rates are coming down. This is the biggest boost for the cost of living for a very, very long time. What we're doing is picking up and fixing the mess that they left.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is not looking at what is happening out there. Every day I speak to businesses who are telling us that they think that they are going bust. And as if businesses and families didn't have enough to worry about, supermarkets say food prices will increase by over 4% because of the jobs tax. And that's before we get to the immoral family farms tax on the very farmers who work so hard to produce our food. What does the Prime Minister have against farmers anyway? Does he not see that his budget is killing farming in this country and he is making life so much harder for everyone else?
Mr. Speaker, the budget provided £5 billion for farming over the next 2 years. That is a record amount. We've set out the roadmap for farming, which has been welcomed by farmers. And many thousands of farms have benefited from the farming schemes. But she talks about prices. Wages are going up higher than prices. That's the first in a long time that's happened. So for families across the country, they're better off under Labour.
He's got no answers today. What the farmers are complaining about is the sustainable farming incentive, which he has just scrapped or withdrawn. They are making mistakes with this budget. And that's why in 2 weeks, the Chancellor will come to this House to present an emergency budget the Prime Minister said we would not need. They will try and make out it's because of global events, but the truth is they trash the economy with their bad choices. They said they'd look after pensioners. Then they snatched winter fuel payments. They said that they would be pro-business, but they hiked taxes on jobs. And he, Mr. Speaker, he promised to freeze council tax, but it's going up by £100. This is a high-tax, low-growth, job-killing government. Will he use the emergency budget to fix the mess he's made?
Mr. Speaker, inflation under them 11%, £22 billion black hole, a mini budget that made us the laughing stock of the world, and they want to give lectures on the economy to us. No, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With 1 in 8 young people across the country not in education, employment or training, people in rugby are worried about a wasted generation. Too many people with disabilities and health conditions are not getting the help that they need to get into work. So will the Prime Minister set out how this government will give everyone who is able to work the support they need, provide compassion to those who can't work, and fix the broken welfare system left behind by, you guessed it, the Conservatives?
I thank him for raising this issue. Mr. Speaker, I come from a family that dealt with disability through my mother and brother over many years, so I do understand the concerns that have been raised by him. But we inherited a system which is broken, it is indefensible economically and morally, and we must and we will reform it. We will have clear principles, Mr. Speaker. We will protect those who need protecting. We will also support those who can work back to work. But Labour is the party of work. We are also the party of equality and fairness.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by giving a shout-out for Young Carers Action Day today, but I promise the House I will not sing. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly spoken about the need to get more people into work, and he repeated that now, so people have more dignity, we can get the economy going, and we can cut the benefits bill after the disgraceful legacy left by the Conservatives.
You were there for 5 years.
But does the Prime Minister recognise that for many disabled people, the best way to help them into work is to support them properly with more special equipment, with training, with better healthcare and so on? And will he also today calm anxieties that he himself has raised for many of us, that the disability benefits for people who simply cannot work will not be cut?
Mr. Speaker, we will, of course, as I've just said, the principles, we will, of course, support those who need support, but also help those who can work into work. They'll be the guiding principles. But what we've inherited is shocking, and they ought to be silent. 1 in 8 young people not in education, work or training. That is a lost generation. That is their inheritance. They've got plenty to say now. They did nothing for 14 years and left this in terrible inheritance.
Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, turning to international issues, can I congratulate the Prime Minister on helping to secure the restoration of US military and intelligence support for Ukraine? But can I press him on progress to persuade President Trump against damaging metal tariffs already hitting British industry? The Prime Minister knows that we on these benches believe he must be more robust with President Trump, like the Europeans and like the Canadians. So will the Prime Minister fly out to Canada as soon as possible to show their new Prime Minister, and the Canadian people that Britain stands with its Commonwealth allies against Trump's threats and against Trump's tariffs?
Well, Canada is an ally, and a very important ally too, and I've spoken to our allies on many occasions about the situation in Canada. On the question of tariffs, obviously, like everybody else, I'm disappointed to see global tariffs in relation to steel and aluminium. But we will take a pragmatic approach. We are, as he knows, negotiating an economic deal which covers and will include tariffs if we succeed, but we will keep all options on the table.
Claire Hannah.
Hi, Elefadra Conadív agus Shock na Gilga Fosta Desh Con Changa agus our culture Kellaroo or Fodandone. Happy St Patrick's Day, everybody, and happy Irish Language Week as well. An opportunity to use Irish language and culture across the world. It's an increasingly turbulent world, Prime Minister, with relationships and norms turned upside down over recent weeks, and that's why I congratulate the Prime Minister and the Taoiseach for re-establishing warm and firm relationships at their summit last week. And it's reassuring for all of us to know that whatever our constitutional future, that bond is lasting and refreshed. Will the Prime Minister join me in wishing a happy St Patrick's Day to all who value our shared bonds? And can I take this opportunity to invite him to Belfast in August 2027, which was announced this week as the host of the Fleadh na HÉireann for the first time?
Well, can I join her in wishing everybody celebrating a very happy St Patrick's Day? Mr. Speaker, she's right. We need a strong and settled relationship between the United Kingdom and Ireland, and the need for that has never been greater, which is why I was delighted to host the Taoiseach in Liverpool last week at our first annual UK-Ireland summit. We've turned the page, started a new era for our relationship with Ireland, and I'd be very happy to go to Belfast in 2027. I want to go much sooner than that.
Andrew Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In just 20 days' time, new sentencing guidance will come into effect that the Justice Secretary has already conceded will be two-tier in its nature. It will mean that the colour of your skin or the religion you have can give you leniency in the eyes of the law and will plunge public confidence in the judiciary into crisis. But it is avoidable. We Conservatives have tabled a bill that, if backed on Friday, can stop this guidance in its tracks. So will the Prime Minister, will he now overrule his Justice Secretary and confirm here and now that he will back this bill, or will he simply step aside and prove he has in fact been two-tier Keir all along?
Well, everyone should be equal before the law. That is why the Lord Chancellor has taken up the issue with the Sentencing Council. But he needs to do his homework, because the proposal that he complains about was drafted in 2024, and the last government was consulted. And when they were consulted, what did they say? They said they welcomed the proposal. Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand that the Shadow Justice Secretary is taking the Sentencing Council to court. Perhaps he should add himself as the second defendant so we can get to the bottom of the ball.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to represent a constituency that has 8 synagogues, a thriving Jewish population, and the UK's largest Jewish cultural centre, JW3. But this week, I was horrified to read reports about rising anti-Semitism on NHS wards, and in particular, a shocking incident in which a Jewish NHS staff member was called a baby killer by their colleague. The NHS that I know and love is open to everyone, regardless of their background. So could I ask the Prime Minister, what is he doing to ensure that my Jewish constituents can safely use our beloved National Health Service?
Well, I thank her for raising these deeply concerning reports. It is completely unacceptable for anyone to experience racism, discrimination or prejudice in the health service. I know my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, takes such reports extremely seriously. It is a fundamental principle that the NHS provides care and treatment for everyone, regardless of race, faith or background. This is a really serious issue. you've let yourself down, you know it. I expect all trusts and healthcare providers to take necessary action against any staff who've expressed views that do not reflect the views and values of the NHS.
Dave Dugan, a closed question.
Question 9, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, he asked about UK-US relations. As he knows, and the House knows, I'm committed to strengthening those relations. The US is an indispensable ally. We are working together to try to secure a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. And I've spoken to the President on a number of occasions, including this week.
Dave Dugan.
I agree with the Prime Minister in those sentiments. The ceasefire negotiations this week are a cause for great optimism, and I welcome the efforts that the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, had done in leading that priority. But last week at the dispatch box, the Prime Minister said in answer to my right honourable friend, the member for Aberdeen South, that he had no knowledge of the United States planning to withdraw military aid from Ukraine, yet they did that the following day. It's against that backdrop, because I know the Prime Minister wants a just and lasting peace in Ukraine that respects Ukraine's borders and territorial integrity, when he's impressing that priority upon the President of the United States, what reassurance can he give the House today that the President of the United States is actually listening?
Let me give this reassurance. As soon as that step was taken, I and my team started work to try and ensure that we could get back to a situation of full support for Ukraine. I won't detail everything that was involved over the last week. I can assure him and the House a huge amount of hard work, discussions and diplomacy was used with all of our allies and others to ensure that we could get yesterday to go as well as we hoped it would. I am pleased that we've made progress. I think that's very important for Ukraine, and I'm extremely pleased that support has been put in, backed by the US, for Ukraine. So that's what I did once I understood what had happened. I'm pleased with where we've got to, but as ever, we must go further.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Disabled people in my constituency are frightened. And they're frightened because they're again hearing politicians use the language of tough choices. And they know from bitter experience that when politicians talk about tough choices, it means the easy option of making the poor and vulnerable pay. So instead of cutting benefits for disabled people, wouldn't the moral thing to do, the courageous thing to do, be to make a real tough choice and introduce a wealth tax on the very wealthiest people in our society?
Well, Mr Speaker, the party opposite left a broken welfare system which locks millions out of work. That is indefensible, in my view, economically and morally. Of course we need to support people who need support. We need to help those who want to work to get back into work, and I think there's a moral imperative in that. He talks about a wealth tax. We have raised money, the energy profits levy, taxing non-doms and air passenger duty on private jets. But this isn't a bottomless pit, and we must kick-start growth to get the economic stability that we need.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Most people would accept that we need more housing in this country, yet so often it's not accompanied by the necessary infrastructure. In my own constituency, thousands of houses are proposed, yet without the £250 million to upgrade Junction 12 of the M5, the inspector is likely to rule our plan unsound. So will the Prime Minister use his upcoming planning and infrastructure bill to see how developer and landowner contributions can more effectively build this vitally needed infrastructure which would benefit communities up and down the country?
Well, he's right. We have to get the houses built that we need in his constituency and elsewhere, something that the party opposite failed to do. That's why we've introduced the infrastructure bill, which I think he welcomes, and that bill will get Britain building so we can deliver on those 1.5 million new homes through our plan for change. In relation to the particular issue he raises, I know that he and my honourable friend, the member for Stroud, have been working together to try to resolve this issue, as I understand it, and I'm happy to ensure he gets a meeting with the relevant minister if that would help in taking it further.
Sure, Jean Joseph.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
can I commend this Labour government's landmark reforms to get Britain building through our plan for change. I look forward to working with ministers to ensure developers deliver on what they promise to local residents, so that new homes also have access to roads, GP surgeries and dentists, and don't create an extra burden on hospitals like the William Harvey Hospital in my Ashford constituency. What is the Prime Minister's message to the blockers standing in the way of the homes and vital infrastructure our country needs?
Well, he's a dedicated campaigner for his constituents. Well, we know who's been standing in the way for the past 14 years. It's the party opposite, and they've learned absolutely nothing. The leader of the opposition claims that she's never opposed growth or development. That's not what she's telling her constituents, Mr. Speaker. Only last month she wrote in her newsletter that she'll keep working with Conservative colleagues to block a vital energy infrastructure project in her own backyard. She's not alone. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, Shadow Defence Secretary, Shadow DEFRA, they're all at it. What a bunch of blockers.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Mr. Speaker, the Employment Rights Bill will grant union equality representatives the right to paid time off work.
But it does.
Will the Prime Minister grant special constables the right to take unpaid leave to perform their duties?
I'm grateful to him for raising the question of special constables, who play a very important role in our communities and keeping us safe. The numbers of special constables dropped under the last government. We support the existing employer-supported policing scheme and will support our special constables, but they dropped under the last government.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Long time.
I recently visited Middlesbrough's James Cook University Hospital and learned of the brilliant work in the neurosciences department for the survivors of stroke, brain and spinal injuries and many others. But it only has 18 rehabilitation beds to serve a population of some 1.4 million people, whereas the guidelines say it needs 80 beds, meaning that patients in the Tees Valley do not get the rehabilitation they need. So will the government remedy the position by ensuring that resources are allocated to meet the ambition to develop a world-class new rehabilitation centre to serve the Tees Valley and beyond?
Well, I thank him for his question. It is important to hear about the important work that James Cook Hospital is doing in his constituency. We are investing £350,000 in research on interventions which support people with functional neurological disorders to rehabilitate them within the community. And of course our plan for change invested £25 billion to cut waiting lists, speed up treatment and shift more care into the community. In relation to the hospital, I'll make sure he gets a meeting with the Minister to see what further can be done.
Sir John Whittington.
Will the Prime Minister look at the case of my constituents, Mr. and Mrs. Adrian Fenton, who returned home from visiting France in their motorhome to discover an illegal immigrant concealed in the bike rack? They reported it immediately to the police, only to receive a fine from the Border Force of £1,500. Will he agree that my constituents ought to be thanked rather than punished? And does he accept that this action will send a message to deter anybody from acting responsibly in the future?
Can I thank him for raising this important case on behalf of his constituents? I've seen some of the details and I am concerned about it, and I do think it's important, as he says, that the Home Office look into it, and therefore we will do so, and I'll make sure that he is updated in relation to that in due course.
It's a doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Veterans in Sefton, one of the many remarkable charities in my constituency, indicate that statistics can only partly measure the price paid by servicemen and women. Incidents of broken marriages, suicides, alcoholism, deep depression and homelessness among veterans remain largely unquantified. Given that, will my right honourable friend restate Labour's commitment to providing our veterans the holistic support they need and deserve?
Well, we owe an extraordinary debt to our veterans, Mr. Speaker. We are committed to renewing the nation's contract with those who've served, and that includes the guarantees of homes for heroes for those who have served, dedicated mental and physical healthcare pathways in the NHS, and dedicated to sport to help those leaving service using their skills to find new and fulfilling careers.
Sarah Dyke.
Yesterday, with no notice, DEFRA closed SFI applications, leaving thousands of farmers who want to deliver public goods waiting for a year without support. So can the Prime Minister assure British farmers that they won't be left stranded and able to support environmental and food resilience goals due to lack of government support?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as she knows, the SFI schemes have operated to provide quite considerable support so far. There have been a number of schemes. They've closed in the past, and then a new scheme has been put in place. They were closed in 2022 and 2023 by the party opposite without the 6 weeks' notice. But we do support farmers. We will be putting forward more details at the spending review. But the difference, Mr. Speaker, in this government is we're funding the farmers. They failed to spend the budget.
Sultana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In October 2023, in an interview with LBC, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I think Israel does have that right," when asked if cutting off power and water to Gaza was appropriate. For 11 days now, Israel has blocked the entry of vital goods and aid into Gaza, subjecting over 2 million people to collective punishment and starvation. Israel's decision to also cut off electricity to a plant supplying drinking water to 500,000 people is yet another blatant violation of international law and further evidence of genocide against the Palestinian people. In light of these facts, does the Prime Minister still maintain that Israel is not committing genocide?
Look, I'm really appalled by Israel blocking aid when it is needed at greater volume and speed than it's ever been needed. Blocking goods and supplies and power entering Gaza risks breaching international humanitarian law, and it shouldn't be happening. And we are doing everything we can to alleviate that situation.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his extremely important upcoming discussions with other nations about Ukraine, will the Prime Minister focus on the fact that it was standard Russian procedure to take over other countries by having bogus elections and installing puppet governments? And will he therefore impress on other colleagues to be very wary of calls to hold elections in Ukraine during a wartime situation, which could result in the subversion and takeover by Russia of the entire country?
Thank you for raising a really important point, and the track record is there for all to see. On top of that, of course, we in this country did not hold elections when we were at war. That is a perfectly reasonable and normal course of behaviour. And yes, of course, that has to be part of our discussions as we go forward, including the meeting that I'm convening on Saturday.
Lord Hatton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. South Dorset is ready to play its part, making Britain a clean energy superpower. But after 14 years of Conservative failure, there are many untapped opportunities on our doorstep. Green investment opportunities such as Port Wind, Moor Wind and a hydrogen storage hub are all coming down the track. So can the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that the government will work with the Crown Court on these projects, invest in key infrastructure and ensure that South Dorset's green energy potential is hardwired into our plan for change?
Well, I thank him. He's absolutely right about making Britain a clean energy superpower. We are committing £2.3 billion to support hydrogen projects, and I recognise the huge potential of South Dorset to become home to a storage hub. We're ensuring public and private investment works together, and that's exactly what the Crown Estate Act does, unlocking significant investment, boosting offshore wind and kick-starting economic growth.
Andrew Rossendale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Leader of the Opposition has already mentioned, later today the Prime Minister will meet the family of our dear late colleague, Sir David Amess, who was so brutally murdered at his constituency surgery 3.5 years ago. I plead with the Prime Minister to reverse the decision to deny the family a public inquiry despite similar inquiries being held into other tragic instances. So, will he please stop this shameful saga and heed the call of the Amess family for a judge-led public inquiry into David's death and the related failure of the Prevent programme from a heartbroken family?
Can I acknowledge just how heartbroken they are? It's difficult to imagine what they've gone through, what they continue to go through. And that's why it's very important that I meet them this afternoon, which I will do, and discuss with them all the questions they want to raise with me. Sir David was a respected and loved a colleague across this House. And as I say, I absolutely understand how his family must feel about the tragic circumstances in which he died and then everything that followed thereafter.
Final question, Chris Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow marks 29 years since 16 children and their teacher were murdered at Dunblane Primary School. In recent weeks, my constituents have raised with me the alarming fact that adverts offering handguns for sale are appearing on technology platforms like Google and YouTube. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that technology companies have an obligation to all of us to do everything proactively possible to prevent illegal advertising of this kind and not rely on a reactive, will remove it when it's reported approach, which is simply not good enough?
The thoughts, I'm sure, of the whole House are with the victims of the Dunblane massacres 29 years after the tragic event. The Online Safety Act will require online services to proactively remove such content from their platforms and prevent it appearing there in the first place. These duties fully take effect from Monday, and then we'll make sure that all companies meet their obligations.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Come to the statement. Minister Daniel Sytner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'd like to update the House on the sustainable farming incentive. We stand on the edge of an unprecedented global transition for British farming. From leaving the European Union to the challenges of climate change and geopolitical events, we are asking more of farmers than ever before. To continue to produce the food that feeds the nation and protect the environment on which our long-term food security depends. And we are determined to create the conditions for farm businesses to be profitable and succeed. Now, we're proud to have secured £5 billion for farming over 2 years, the largest budget for sustainable food production in our country's history. That's £1.8 billion for customers already in agreements, £1 billion for farmers who are now in SFI agreements, and a further £150 million for farmers in the SFI pilot. And Labour has got that money out of the door and into farmers' pockets. We've invested to bring thousands more farmers into the ELM schemes, which I'm afraid were vastly underspent by the previous government, to make a record number of capital items available for the coming year to help farmers carry out actions under the SFI and countryside stewardship, with £600 million available for productivity, animal health and welfare innovation and other measures to support agricultural productivity, as well as 50 landscape recovery projects across the country. And we've responded directly to calls from the sector to roll out a new higher tier scheme and to increase payment rates so HLS agreement holders, many of them upland farmers, are fairly rewarded for their work. So we now have more than half of all farmers in schemes, 37,000 live SFI agreements, 50,000 farmers in ELM agreements. Under the SFI, 800,000 hectares of arable land being farmed without insecticides, 300,000 hectares of low-impact grassland managed sustainably, and 75,000 kilometres of hedgerows being protected and restored, which is a huge success for nature. And I want to thank all the farmers involved and to reassure them that all existing SFI agreements will be honoured. Farmers will continue to be paid under the terms of their agreement for its duration. If they entered into a 3-year SFI agreement earlier this year, they will be paid until 2028. If they submitted an SFI application but this has not yet started, that will also be honoured, and all farmers who took part in the SFI pilot will be able to apply for an agreement. But the fact is, the high uptake of the scheme means it is now fully subscribed. Now, I'm afraid as a government, we inherited SFI with no spending cap, despite a finite farming budget, and that cannot continue. So we will continue to support farmers to transition to more sustainable farming models, including through the thousands of existing SFI agreements over the coming years and a revamped SFI offer. But this is an opportunity to improve how we do that under a fair and just farming transition. A transition that supports farms to be profitable businesses in their own right, through fairer supply chains, better regulation and greater market access, and that directs public funding in a fair and orderly way towards the priorities we have set out on food, farming and nature. So we will be strategic in how we design our schemes and responsible within the budget we have available. This is about using public money in a way that supports food production, restores nature and respects farmers as the business people they are. SFI can and must work better for all farms and for nature, and I will set out the details of the revised SFI offer following the spending review, including when it will open for applications. We will work closely with the sector to design an improved scheme so they can tell us what works best for their businesses. We'll also put in place strong budgetary controls so that SFI is affordable to the public purse. The revised offer will align with our land use framework to better target SFI actions fairly and effectively, focusing on helping less productive land contribute to our priorities for food, farming and nature. But the underlying problem facing the sector is farmers do not make enough money, and the government is changing that. We announced the members obviously may laugh, but actually businesses do need to make money. They might need to know that. So we announced a new set of policies at NFU conference last month aimed at improving farm profitability, securing our food security and protecting nature. And through our farming roadmap, we're creating the conditions for farmers to run profitable businesses that can withstand future challenges. This decision is about investing in long-term stability. It's about a future where farmers are supported to run profitable businesses, where public money is used in a better way to better restore nature and to secure long-term food security.
Shadow Secretary of State Victoria Atkins.
Well, may I thank the Minister for an advance copy of his statement, which I'm going to pull apart in a moment. May I thank you also, Mr Speaker, for granting the urgent question that forced the Minister to the dispatch box, because they sneaked this statement out last night, presumably hoping nobody would notice. But guess what? The countryside has. Because the question that we are all asking ourselves is, what has this government got against farmers and the countryside? They sneaked this announcement out that they were halting the Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme immediately. This scheme replaced the EU's Common Agricultural Scheme when we left the EU. We set up this scheme with our Brexit freedoms to establish a farming policy that works for farmers, the environment and food production. Yet Labour pulled the plug without warning last night. This scheme is popular with farmers, and he doesn't have to take my word for it. To quote one, these schemes have the potential to be the most progressive and environmentally responsible schemes of their kind anywhere in the world. Those were the words of the former president of the CLA and father of the honourable member for Mid and South Pembrokeshire, who I'm sure will agree with his father's own analysis. Why then would this city-dwelling government stop such a successful scheme? In the word of the CLA President, Victoria Vivian, of all the betrayals so far, this is the most cruel. It actively harms nature, it actively harms the environment, and with war once again raging in Europe, to actively harm our food production is reckless beyond belief. Does the Minister think she's wrong? And yet, despite this, the Secretary of State, who, by the way, is missing in action, this is a significant statement which he has made, and he's sending out his junior minister to take the heat. Perhaps it's because the Secretary of State didn't want me to remind him of his own words in November, which was, he said, that farmers feel ignored, alienated and disrespected. Well, I do hope the Minister is going to be telling us how that's going now. The farming policy of this government can be summarised in 3 sentences. They will halt any farming and environmental scheme on which farmers rely without warning, without consultation, and using criteria they have never before defined. The state will seize their farmland at will through the compulsory purchase orders that were announced yesterday in the planning bill. And if families have managed to cling on to their farms despite all of this, then Labour will tax them for dying. But I'm delighted to hear that the Farming Minister himself conceded that farmers don't make enough money, so I hope that he's going to be changing the family farm tax. This adds up to nothing less than an outright assault on the countryside. As a proud rural MP, someone who actually likes the countryside, I'm already being contacted by constituents and farmers across the United Kingdom who have had the door slammed in their face with no notice and asking how they are meant to diversify, make a living and protect our countryside. Now, the Prime Minister said he understood the significance of losing a farm, acknowledging it can't come back, and warned against constantly moving the goalposts for the agricultural sector. Yet this is exactly what his government is doing. The statement issued by the government last night was a masterclass in Orwellian doublespeak. It says the SFI scheme has, I quote, reached completion. Well, what criteria has the government used? Because it hasn't set those criteria out before. The government's own website stated that up to 6 weeks' notice would be given for the withdrawal as SFI. Why was this disregarded last night? And how does he recognise that by doing so, this government has betrayed trust in the farming community yet again? How many farmers does his department believe will now be caught out without an SFI agreement during the transition period of at least a year? And just as with the family farm tax, Labour has got its figures wrong. The CLA has asked me to ask the Minister what his government's ambitions are now for the 2/3 of farmers in England who are not currently in environmental schemes. How much have the vast cuts to BPS payments saved his department, and where has that money gone? And how will the Secretary of State support upland farmers who were intending to move on to the sustainable farming incentives? And then, of course, there's the legal problems that this announcement last night has caused. How will the government meet its legally binding environmental targets, given they rely so heavily on the SFI scheme? And I do hope the Minister is going to be able to give us a good, clear legal analysis on the impact of changes to SFI on internal market competition law between England and other devolved authorities as a result of this change. Now, any words that the Minister uses about food security are meaningless in the face of this policy, particularly as we all know that this government has been delaying consideration and grants of these applications since the general election. So the figures he is using are wrong. The theory behind this policy is very questionable, and yet the government would have us all believe that he understands farming and the impact that this will have on farmers. They are in despair. And so my message to farmers is clear. We have got your back. We will please help you to hang on in there for the next 4 years. We will axe the family farm tax and we will sort out this shocking mess of SFI to help build a bright future for British farming with British farmers.
Minister.
Well, really, I'd hoped that the Secretary of State would actually understand the way the schemes her own government created actually work. The problem we faced when we inherited, and there are others on her front bench who I think understand this better, will know that this time last year, these schemes were undersubscribed. They are now oversubscribed, and it's not a complicated thing to say that when the budget is spent, a responsible government responds to that. The budget is spent. The budget has been spent, and what we are doing in a sensible, serious way. The honourable members opposite should actually be celebrating the success of the fact that so many farmers are now in these schemes and taking them up. So I am absolutely confident that we will be able to sort out the mess that we have inherited. But basically, if you set up schemes without proper budgetary controls, you end up in this kind of position. We have had to take the hard decision that the previous government ducked.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister confirm that ELM scheme agreements will remain in place under this Labour government, including SFI, and there will be a new and better targeted SFI on offer as soon as possible, with details to follow in the spending review?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. It's absolutely the right point, and that's what we should be doing, reassuring people out there that people who are in schemes absolutely safe, absolutely carrying on as before. But the basic point is that when a scheme is full, it's full.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for sight of his statement in advance. The closure of the SFI from 6 p.m. last night came without warning or consultation, and it constitutes the breaking of the government's word to farmers. Farmers are already losing their basic payment this year, but are now excluded from the very scheme designed to replace that. Hasn't the Minister then broken his word to farmers and to all who care about nature? Will he clarify how much money he will save from the BPS cuts this year, and that therefore it is not true that SFI is overspent? Isn't it true that when the BPS cut is taken into account, more than £400 million of the £2.5 billion farming budget will remain unspent? A bigger budget is pointless if you do not spend it. This money was supposed to reward farmers for nature restoration and sustainable food production. Doesn't this damage both? There are 6,100 new entrants to SFI this year, and yet only a mere 40 of them are hill farms. Doesn't this prove that, because of the failure of the Conservatives in the last administration, the big landowners and the corporates are already comfortably inside the tent, but the farmers who are outside and now locked out without warning are Britain's poorest farmers in Britain's most beautiful places like mine in the Lakes and the Dales? As the Tories oversaw a 41% drop in hill farm incomes in just 5 years, isn't this a bitter blow that is unbearable for our upland farmers? This betrayal will outrage everyone who cares for our environment, for our upland nature and landscapes. It will outrage everyone who cares about food security. It will outrage everyone who cares about our tourism economy, and it will outrage everyone who clings to that old-fashioned expectation that governments should keep their word. On Monday, the Secretary of State came to my beautiful constituency to pose for pictures by Windermere. I wonder whether he might come back tomorrow and face up to the farmers who steward the stunning landscapes around our beautiful lakes and who he has abandoned so shamefully. Will he reopen SFI, honour his promises, or else turn his back on the very people who feed us?
Minister.
Well, again, I'm disappointed in the honourable gentleman's comments, because he is a thoughtful person, and he and I have debated these issues many times. I'm sorry he didn't welcome the uplift in HLS payments, which he and many others have been asking for a long, long time, which will benefit upland farmers. And I would take him back to many of the discussions that we have had about the importance of getting the farm budget out to farmers. That is what has happened. The full budget is actually being spent, and that should be celebrated.
Alex Sobel.
The fruit and vegetable aid scheme is an important lifeline for producers collaborating, and it has meant that we've had a huge increase in our tonnage of various fruit and vegetables. That scheme is finishing on the 31st December 2025. What future plans have we got to support fruit and vegetable producers to collaborate in 2026 and beyond?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. It's an important one. That is, of course, an EU legacy scheme, and we're considering the best way of taking that forward in future. But we're absolutely committed to supporting and working with the horticultural sector.
We have around 35 minutes remaining. Questions have to be short, and the Minister's response has to be on point and tight as well. Follow the House, said Whitney.
Will the Minister leave for a moment the hallowed cloisters of Cambridge and accept my invitation to take a rural ride through Lincolnshire, the breadbasket of England, to meet my farmers? Does he agree that sustainable farming is the key to food security, and therefore will he take up with his colleagues in the Department of Net Zero why they're covering 15% of Lincolnshire with solar farms, in addition to taking away this grant?
Minister.
Well, again, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question. I'd always be happy to visit Lincolnshire. I've done it on a number of occasions. But on the question of how we allocate our land, of course, it's very important that we make sure that the new land use framework works effectively, because that's the most rational way of making those decisions.
Julie Minns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's extremely welcome that under this government more money has been spent on schemes and more farms are in schemes than was the case under the last government. However, there are smaller farms like those in my constituency of North Cumbria who would not have had their plans as far advanced as their larger neighbours, along with their consultants. Can I ask him to outline what support will be available to those smaller farms going forward?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, because she absolutely touches on the critical point. The schemes we inherited had no way of prioritising properly. It was a first-come, first-served scheme. So the kind of farmers that she's describing were disadvantaged. Now, we've had to work with a scheme that we inherited. We were very clear when I took over that we were not going to immediately overturn the existing system. We wanted to give people confidence about the future, but when we come to redesign the scheme, we can design it better to address the issues that my honourable friend has raised.
Chair Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I note the Minister's complaint that he inherited an uncapped budget. Can he tell the House, is this something that he just noticed on Monday, that he had to close the scheme without warning on Tuesday? On the 14th of January, the Director General from his department in charge of food, biosecurity and trade told my select committee, "I do not think we can expect that every single farm will be viable, but if we are talking about 92–93% having the opportunity of productivity improvements, that's what we are aiming for." In other words, the government's aim is to lose 7 to 8% of our farms. What will that figure be after today's announcements?
Well, I'm always grateful for questions from the right honourable gentleman who chairs the Select Committee. Those figures on future farm viability, of course, go all the way back to the Agriculture Act, where there was a serious attempt made to assess future farm viability. Now, this is why the Secretary of State and I are so determined that we absolutely address those problems around farm viability. They're not going to be supported forever by the public purse. We know that. So it's very important that we address all those range of issues. But I'm very happy to have a further conversation with him.
Sam Rushworth.
Shares with me a wish to see a bit more humility from the party opposite, given their failure to get the agricultural budget out of the door. But I would ask the Minister to please, if I could hear myself think a moment, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I could hear myself think, I would ask the Minister to ensure that every penny in SFI arrangements will be paid to farmers, but also that those who've already applied and who are eligible will have their applications taken forward.
I thank my honourable friend. I very much enjoyed visiting his constituency and talking to farmers there about these issues, and I can actually absolutely give him that commitment.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For those who have farming businesses, how does the Minister expect them to plan for the future when he sneaks an announcement out like his department did last night, despite a message on his website saying we would give you 6 weeks' notice of any closure? What does he have against our farmers and against our food producers?
Well, the only thing I've got anything against is the previous government who set this scheme up in the first place and set it up in a way in which SFI 22 was closed in exactly the same way, SFI 23 was closed in exactly the same way, SFI 24 is only different in one sense, in that it is now oversubscribed rather than undersubscribed, and as a consequence, it would not have been possible to give notice because it would have led to a further spike in applications.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Minister has just alluded, it's called SFI 24. Might that be a clue in the title, and therefore it's perhaps less surprising than people are saying, given that it's now 2025?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and she makes a very sensible point, which is that we saw a succession of schemes announced by the previous government. What I want to get to is a scheme that will work for the long term. And she's absolutely right that I'm afraid the way it was set up by the previous government, it was first come, first served.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the overnight withdrawal of this funding is yet another blow against many of my farmers in King Swinford and South Staffordshire. The Minister still hasn't answered why he has broken his word that was clearly set out on the government website to give at least 6 weeks' notice, nor the chair of the Select Committee's question about if the reason for doing so was because the budget had become exhausted. When did that first come to his attention? Was it really yesterday afternoon?
Well, it first came to my attention 5 years ago during the passage of the Agriculture Act when I warned exactly that this would happen, because if you move from a basic payment system where everyone has an entitlement to a system that is based on bidding, this is what happens. So perhaps he should have woken up 5 years ago.
Cat Smith. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for coming to the House to make the statement. However, I did wake up this morning to many emails in my inbox from farmers across Lancaster and Wyre, and I would like to invite the Minister to join me, because I'm going to accept the invitation from my constituent Kath to visit her farm, because she was in the situation of her SFI application was ready to go. She's coming out of the countryside stewardship agreement, so therefore she's been left in limbo, and I wondered if whether or not he would join me in meeting farmers across Lancaster and Wyre.
Minister.
Well, as I've said to many honourable members, I'm always happy to try and meet farmers whenever I can, and I'll add her to my list. But I absolutely understand the point she is making, but this was a fundamental problem with the schemes as designed that we have inherited. We need to do better in future, and that is what we will do as we redesign it.
Andrew George.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What assurance can the Minister give farmers in my constituency, which were recently designated a triple SI in the Penwith area, as well as being supported, of course, by a recent designation of landscape recovery as well? Now they seem to be in a position where there's going to be no support for it at all. How are they going to adjust to this new regime, and what assurance can he give my farmers that the funding will be in place to support their actions in the triple SI?
Minister.
So there's some complexity in that question which I might need to address directly with the honourable gentleman, but landscape recovery is absolutely not affected by this, so it depends upon the exact nature of the application.
Campbell Savers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister confirm more about the timetable for SFI 25 to provide some reassurance to my farmers in Penrith and Solway that we are going to deliver? And can he also explain a little bit more about how we ensure that more of my hill farmers get into the SFI scheme, which the last government failed to deliver on?
Minister.
As I said, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question. It's an important one because we will be working with farmers and organisations to redesign the schemes so it addresses that very question. Now, that will be taking place over the summer this year. And we'll, obviously, once we've had those conversations, we'll be able to announce exact timings. But he's absolutely right to raise the point that there has been no fair allocation of resources. It has been just on a first-come, first-served basis.
Charlie Dewhurst.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, the Minister's own statement here says this decision is about investing in long-term stability. First, we've had the body blow of the family farm tax. We've had the reduction in BPS. We've had the pulling of capital grants. And now the cancellation of SFI. How is any farming business expected to invest in the long term?
Minister.
The honourable gentleman is a sensible person who had many discussions with him over the years. When he says pulled, what he means is the budget was completed. And it's exactly the same in this case. And I do think it's important that honourable members opposite understand that you can't spend the same money twice. Now, they lived in a world of cakeism. We don't. And the money is spent. Once it's spent, you then have to move to a new set of schemes when you have the money available.
Andrew Pakes.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for bringing the statement to the House and sharing such honesty about challenges in the scheme. Can I urge the Minister not to take any lectures from the party opposite, who oversaw a chaos in DEFRA and a £300 million underspend, a shameful record? And can I ask the Minister if he can assure the House and outline details to ensure that future schemes gets the money out the door, gets it into farmers' pockets and stops the waste and bureaucracy we've seen under the previous government in DEFRA?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I'm afraid I was genuinely dismayed by what I found when I came into the department, perhaps not entirely surprised, but we have spent the last 6 or 7 months trying to get control of this, because if you have a scheme which is not capped, not managed, no budgetary control, then you have a problem. The figure's £5 billion overall, the biggest amount for farming that we've had. We're going to make sure the money gets out to farmers.
Sarah Dyke.
Deputy Speaker, coming at a time of record low confidence in farming, many farmers in Glastonbury and Somerton will feel that this sudden closure of the SFI scheme will bring them closer to closing their farm gates for the very last time, at a time when food security is at an all-time low. So what communications are going to affected farming businesses, and what support will DEFRA give to those that are dealing with vulnerable farmers at the sharp end?
Well, I have to say I don't actually agree with some of the honourable lady's question, because the food security report that was published at the end of last year did not bear out her analysis. But the RPA has written to farmers today, setting out exactly the situation to give people reassurance.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the Minister surprised that the party opposite is now crying crocodile tears when they failed to get £350 million of SFI out into farmers' hands, and they failed to stop speculative acquisition of farmland by tax dodgers?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I'm afraid, as on so many other issues, we're having to clear up the mess that we inherited, and it will take time, but we are setting out a clear path for the future, which I hope over time people will come to support.
Paul.
I don't know how to break this to the Minister, but I don't know if he realises, but when the thousands of farmers come to Westminster, they're not coming to thank him or the Secretary of State. Yesterday we had the sustainable farming incentive announcement. Today, an announcement that there is to be no extension to his honourable friend from Leeds, to the food and vegetable aid scheme, no extension to that. And that, of course, follows the family farm tax. The announcement which the Minister has made today speaks very ill of the financial management of his department. I make no apologies to repeat the questions asked by my right honourable and honourable friends. When did he know that he was hitting his budget ceiling? When had he set that as a criteria? What discussions had he had with the Treasury to increase the budget? And why was he deliberately, I presume, misleading farmers by pledging a 6-week notice period, and it wasn't even 6 seconds?
Just before the Minister responds, the honourable member, he knows that he cannot use the term deliberately misleading, so I'll ask him to withdraw that statement.
Inadvertently misleading. Inadvertently misleading.
No. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will take the honourable gentleman back to the origins of this debate. When we moved from basic payments to these schemes, it was always the case that there were going to be a point where the budget was spent. So we've known it for 5 years. We've known it for 5 years. That would.
Terry Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Having spent several weeks and months encouraging farmers to access this scheme, naturally I'm disappointed with the closure and hope that there will be a replacement in short order. But the fact that I can find so many farmers in my constituency and elsewhere that weren't accessing this scheme, is that not evidence of the party opposite failing farmers over so many years?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. Actually, of course, the thing is that many farmers are now in these schemes and benefiting from them, and also we're getting the environmental benefits that the whole process of transition away from basic payments to the environmental land management schemes was designed to achieve. So let me pay some credit to the party opposite. They set this train in motion, essentially. But what they didn't do was set up the schemes in a way that could properly be managed, and that is what we are now doing.
Ellie Childs.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, this government pulled the rug out from underneath thousands of farmers by cancelling the SFI with zero notice, shamefully, despite saying that they would give 6 weeks, but without putting in place anything to support farmers going into the future. My inbox this morning is full of emails from multiple farmers despairing, who were on the point of submitting an application, had no way of planning for this, and now are utterly left in the lurch. How does the Minister expect the UK to make that vital transition to nature-friendly farming, boosting UK food production, if this is how they treat farmers?
Well, absolutely astonished at the Honourable Lady's contribution. She should be celebrating the fact that so many farmers are now farming in an environmentally sensitive way. And I'd invite her to help us make sure that in future these schemes work better. But this is actually a cause for celebration about the benefits of these environmental land management schemes.
Chris Hinckliffe.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've also been contacted by concerned and impacted farmers in North East Hertfordshire. Can the Minister assure me that the revamped SFI alluded to will allow farmers to plan seasons ahead over the remainder of this Parliament as they need to?
Minister.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question. Quite clearly, over the last 5 years, we have all known that this was a transition that was happening. There was always going to be a point in this transition when we moved from basic payments to environmental land management schemes where it would be down to people applying for these schemes. So I understand my honourable friend's concerns. What I would encourage farmers to do is apply early in these schemes. It was a first-come, first-served scheme before. In the future, we'll try and make sure there's a better process for allocating, but that's the system we inherited.
Adam Dance.
One of the key messages from farmers at my forum I held in my constituency, Yeovil, was that they have lost trust in this government and investing in sustainable farming. Does the Minister recognising ending SFI with no warning has only worsened the loss of trust? And what plans does the government have to restore Yeovil's farmers' confidence in this government?
Well, I hear the honourable gentleman's question, but I would say that the fact that we've got so many people in agreements, so much land actually being farmed within these agreements, shows that many people in this country have absolute confidence in what we're doing.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. How on earth does the Minister correlate saying in his statement he wants to work with the sector when last night the government gave 30 minutes, just 30 minutes notice to the NFU, the sector, of this shameful cut to the SFI budget? What does that actually say about DEFRA's previous commitment to transparency, cooperation and co-design?
Minister.
Well, again, I'd say to the honourable gentleman that this has been a process going on for 5 years now, and that perhaps he should have looked a bit more closely at what was about to happen.
Carla Lockhart.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Minister, trust between farmers and this government is well and truly broken. Farmers feel betrayed, let down, and many are at breaking point. The closure of the SFI is a bitter and I believe a calculated blow on top of the family farm tax grab, and it will be the final straw for many British farmers, the people who feed us. How can the Minister justify sending over £500 million to farms in Africa, Asia and South America and stripping support for our own homegrown farmers?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her question, but I would just point out this is a scheme that relates to England, and the different devolved governments have different schemes. But in terms of the question about international aid, I would say that the key thing for us is to make sure that we support our farmers here, which is why we're spending a record £5 billion on farming over the next 2 years.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The one thing in the Minister's statement that farmers in my Brigg-in-Immingham constituency would agree with is that they are not making enough money. When, as I hope, the Minister takes up the Father of the House's invitation to visit Lincolnshire, will he agree to meet face-to-face with my farmers and explain to them exactly what his government are doing to increase their profitability?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. We've had many exchanges across the chamber over the years. I'd be very happy to speak to his farmers and particularly talk to him about the work we're doing on supply chain fairness, which is very important to me.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Farmers in North Shropshire are really keen to improve the environment and farm in a friendly way, but they're also running businesses and they need to plan. There are farmers in my constituency who are hoping to apply for grants to raise the water table in peat soil areas. Those grants hadn't even opened, that's why they hadn't applied, and now the opportunity's gone. Can he tell us what he's going to do to enable farmers to plan and what the replacement scheme is going to look like?
Well, the Honourable Lady raises an important question. SFI is only one part of the set of schemes that the Department has to work with farmers on nature restoration, and my colleague is just telling me we're £300 million available for peat restoration, so there are other schemes available.
Dr Luke Evans.
No notice and the scheme immediately closed. The Minister says it's full, it's complete. When did he know this, and why didn't he tell the farmers it was going to happen?
Exactly.
I think there's still a misunderstanding about how these schemes work. If you have a first-come, first-served scheme, and people have known for weeks and weeks and weeks, months, that it would be full at some point. So there comes a point where you have to make a decision, and if you are working within your budgets properly, you can hardly say a week or two before that suddenly it's going to close, because you then get a spike in applications. It's like a run on a bank. I'm afraid, basically, when the scheme is finished, it's finished.
Ross Savage.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Nature and food, farming and farmers are the absolute foundation of British life in every sense, and this change is deeply regrettable. Can the Minister assure this House that every support will be given to farmers to adapt to these changes and to give them the help with the time, the technology that they don't have? They are already on their knees. Please, can the Minister assure this House that the necessary support will be given to stop them from buckling under the load of these successive changes?
Minister.
Well, I hear the Honourable Lady's question, but I'll just repeat to her, with 50,000 farmers in ELM agreements, the majority of farmers are already working with us to make that change to environmentally friendly farming. It was never clear how many of the overall numbers of farmers would make the transitions into the new schemes. Obviously, it's not a matter of compulsion. We invite people to apply, and they were invited to apply last year. When the new scheme comes along, I invite people to apply then.
Andrew Smith.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister is here, ducking and dodging questions like a Poundland Alistair Campbell at the minute. He started out with "we knew 5 years ago," then just very quickly it turned to just weeks ago. He said that this is cause for celebration. I don't think I'll be finding any of my farmers that will be celebrating this. And I would just like to say to the Minister, come and speak and say these things directly to farmers' faces and see the response you get rather than the comfort there. Do you really want to be a minister that much? You're willing to say such ridiculous things. You can find money for lots of other projects. So just simply come to Fylde and speak to the farmers.
Minister.
Well, I was going to say I was grateful for the question, but I'm not sure I was really. What I would actually like to do is to invite the honourable gentleman to come and talk to people who are engaged in nature-friendly farming, who benefit from these schemes and who are actually undertaking the transition that I would give the previous government credit for on starting out for. We wanted to move away from the common agricultural policy to a new system. That is what we are doing. The schemes weren't designed well enough in my view, and that is what we are now addressing.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was contacted by the Great Big Dorset Hedge initiative 3 weeks ago, who told me that capital grants under SFI had already been frozen. Can the Minister confirm when the decision to close was actually made, whether applications submitted will be granted and how long they'll have to wait? And as farmers are already obliged to improve hedges with more than 10% gaps under their agreements, how will they access funding to do so to enable their existing funding to be maintained?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady raises an important set of points there. We now have 75,000 kilometres of hedgerow within these schemes. The basic point is that we have a fixed budget, and just as with the capital grants, when they're spent, they're spent. There will be another set of grants available in the future, and I'd invite her constituents to apply at that point. But what we cannot get away from is there is not an endless supply of money, and we have to work within the budgets.
Lewis.
I understand the Minister's point that it's been known all along that at some point the fixed budget would be exhausted. A simple question for him. On which day were ministers first informed that that budget had been exhausted?
Minister.
Well, we made the decision yesterday because we reached that point.
Caroline Borden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's beginning to feel a little bit like a game of top trumps between who can cause the most financial unpredictability to farmers, be it the botched ELMS rollout or cancelling this scheme at a moment's notice. We know that half of Britain's fruit and veg farmers expect to go out of business, and the Minister has said that he will support farmers to be profitable through fairer supply chains. So could the Minister explain to the House what that is going to look like?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for that's a very big question. What I would point her to is the fair dealing clauses in the Agriculture Act, which were brought forward. Some of them in the dairy sector are already. We're working at the pig sector soon. Basically, sector by sector, we're trying to sort out the improvements that are needed to get fairness through the supply chain. It's a very big, difficult, complicated question, but it's essential for the future.
Deputy Brown.
The announcement sneaked out with no notice last night. The Minister will know, if he knows anything about farming, that farming takes months, if not years, to plan. Yeah. They had no notice of this. Will the Minister now tell us what is to replace it, when he's going to consult, and when it's likely to come into operation?
Minister.
I'm grateful for the question because it is what we will do is over the next few months, through the spending review, we'll be reviewing how we can improve the scheme to avoid the very quick point that he has just outlined, and that I'll be reporting back to the House later in the summer.
Ben Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Having met with young farmers at Duchy College in North Cornwall last week, it's clear confidence in the farming sector is at an all-time low, with many looking for alternative careers. With the government's hammer blow to SFI payments on top of the family farm tax, what plans does the Minister have to incentivise young people to get into farming? Now they face a huge tax bill upon inheriting their family farm and will no longer be incentivised for environmental stewardship and sustainable farming.
Well, I completely disagree with the premise of the question, as the honourable gentleman will probably realise, because he's right to say we need to get generational change into farming, and there are a number of ways in which that can happen. But no, I'm not laughing at it at all. I'm telling you, it's a very, very serious point here. I am genuinely concerned about the future of the farming sector unless we get generational change. We'll be looking closely at how we can do that in future. But in terms of stability, having the £5 billion budget that we've secured was a very, very good first step.
Ms. Brown-Fuller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My farmers in Chichester are exhausted with the ever-changing schemes and the time it takes to apply for those schemes. So imagine their surprise when they find out that the SFI scheme has closed, not with no notice, I think that's unfair, with 30 minutes notice given to the NFU as opposed to the 6 weeks that they were promised, and at a time when BPS schemes are significantly reducing. What communication and support is going to be given for those family farms that have missed out on this round of SFI funding?
Minister.
Again, I thank the honourable lady for her question. What I would say is that it should have been clear to people for a long, long time that this transition was coming, because that was the move away from a system based on entitlements for every farmer through the basic payment system to a system that relied on people applying to what was essentially a fixed budget. Now, I agree with her, and I agree with many of the other contributions, that the way the system was set up did not allow proper prioritisation or fairness in terms of allocation. That's what we would like to change in future, but that's the system we inherited. And I'm afraid that is where we are at the moment. But remember, the vast majority, or the majority certainly, are already in schemes. And for those that have not yet come forward, what I'd gently say for the future is the advice is probably for these kind of schemes, it's better to apply earlier rather than to wait.
Steph Aquarone.
The sudden completion of the SFI scheme
will be a worry to many farmers and local people. I'm also very concerned by reports that if you were only given 30 minutes notice on such a huge change, can the Minister assure my farmers that DEFRA will learn lessons from poor communication and lack of clarity that's plagued this scheme and other initiatives in the past to give them the confidence they need going forwards?
Well, let me perhaps repeat the point. This is not about communication. If you've got a scheme which has got a fixed amount of money in it and you suddenly say it's going to close in 2 or 3 weeks, then you will get a surge in applications and you'll have to close it the same day. So that is a flaw in the way the scheme was designed originally. We want to do better in future.
Danny Chambers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. International events have pushed national security right up the agenda, and I'm sure we've got cross-party acknowledgement that food security is a vital part of national security. Given the changing geopolitical situation now, has there been an impact assessment on changes to farming budgets like this removal of SFI and other stresses on farming budgets and cash flow on our food security?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman makes an important point, and I would refer him back to the food security report that was published. But there's been no change to the amount of money available. The £5 billion budget is there. This is a discussion about who gets it.
John Mill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister explain to my farmers in Horsham why he did not feel any need to have any consultation with any farming stakeholder in advance of this announcement?
Minister.
Well, again, I'd refer the Honourable Gentleman to the question I raised earlier. It's first come, first served scheme. If you start having a consultation, everybody applies that day and you have to shut it at that point. This is a flaw in the way the scheme was designed.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister is much liked in this chamber, and we all know that. However, it is disappointing to hear of the pausing of a new application for sustainable farming incentives for farms in England. It is understandable, of course, that this would be seen as a betrayal to so many farmers. In Northern Ireland, agriculture support is different, but nonetheless, the central funding comes from this government centrally here. So can the Minister assure that funding for Northern Ireland farmers, which comes from here, will not be reduced or falter as a result of today's announcement, and steps will be taken to protect our agricultural industry and our farmers, which are the backbone of our economy? Thanks so much.
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his kind words, and I suspect we shall renew our acquaintance in Westminster Hall this afternoon. But I can assure him that this announcement makes no difference to the funding arrangements for Northern Ireland.
That concludes the point of order. Victoria Atkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has been asked repeatedly why no notice was given to farmers of the closure of this scheme. He has given a range of answers, including, and I quote, people knew weeks ago, months ago, about this closure, and even stretching to 5 years ago. This is very important, not least because business decisions are having to be made on the fly today, but also, of course, there may be legal consequences to the answer the Minister has given. So how can we encourage the Minister to correct the record and state the fact that no notice was given to farmers?
I'm grateful for the Right Honourable Member for giving notice of her point of order. The Chair is not responsible for the accuracy of Minister's statements in the House, but she has put her point of order on the record. I don't believe that. No, then I don't believe that the Minister wishes to respond, and I will end that there. The next point of order is Marie Tidbill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to correct the record and also make a declaration of interest. In my excitement in making my first intervention on the Employment Rights Bill yesterday, I did not point members to my register of interest, nor my proud membership of Community Union, GMB and Unison. So I would like to ensure that is on the record, as with my register of interest. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Member for advance notice of her point of order. I know that she had been diligent in seeking advice on how and when to declare interest, which has now been placed on the record. Point of order, Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The former Defence Minister, the Right Honourable Member for South West Wiltshire, on May the 21st, 2024, published records of blood and urine tests relating to nuclear test veterans. He said at that time there were 150. It's now become clear from correspondence for a court case brought by the British nuclear test veterans there are 370 documents mentioning blood and urine. This includes 265 previously unseen and released. This raises the possibility, Madam Deputy Speaker, as you will appreciate, that the AWE misled ministers about the number of records, and then inadvertently and entirely innocently, the minister brought the wrong information to this House. I seek your guidance on how the government can both correct the record but also publish those extra records. The nuclear test veterans deserve nothing less.
I am grateful to the honourable member for giving notice of his point of order. The Chair is not responsible for the accuracy of ministerial statements in the House, but he has indeed put his point on the record, and no doubt the Treasury benches are taking note and listening. Now, I'll give the front benches a few moments to swap over before we move on to the 10-minute rule motion. 10-minute rule motion, Liam Conlon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Secretary of State to report to Parliament on the potential merits of disregarding payments received under the Mother and Baby Institutions Payment Scheme operated by the Government of Ireland for the purposes of taxation, means-tested social security payments and social care capital limits, and for connected purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, Filamina Lee was 18 years old when she became pregnant in 1952 and was sent to Sean Ross Abbey Mother and Baby Home in Roscrea, County Tipperary in Ireland. Here Filamina gave birth to her son Anthony, and here they both lived until Anthony reached the age of 3 and Filamina was cruelly forced to give him up for adoption. Anthony was sold to a couple in the United States. Filamina would never see him again. Almost 60 years on, Filamina's story reached a global audience when it was made into the Oscar-nominated film Filamina, starring Dame Judi Dench and Steve Coogan. The film chronicles the time Filamina spent in Sean Ross Abbey and her painstaking search for her long-lost son decades later with the help of author Martin Sixsmith. I wish Filamina's story was an isolated one. Sadly, it is not. Filamina is one of tens of thousands of women and their infant children who spent time in mother and baby homes across Ireland for the perceived sin of becoming pregnant outside of marriage. The women were regularly used as unpaid labour, and infant mortality was alarmingly high. They experienced harsh conditions, mistreatment and abuse, both physical and psychological. In certain homes, women were routinely separated from their children, with some being adopted against the wishes or even knowledge of their mothers, as happened to Filamina Lee and her son Anthony. As a direct result of the abuse and trauma they experienced, many mother and baby home survivors moved to England. In some cases, they came here because they thought that disappearing from their home country was the only way to protect their families' reputations. And so for decades, thousands of survivors, including here in Britain, lived in secrecy and shame. It wasn't until 2021 they finally received an apology from the then Taoiseach Micheál Martin for what he described as a profound generational wrong visited upon Irish mothers and their children. This was followed by the Mother and Baby Institutions Payment Scheme, which opened to applications last March. The scheme represents a measure of accountability for what happened, recognising the lifelong impact that time spent in these institutions will have. It's an impact that will be felt in all corners of a survivor's life, from earning potential and financial security to physical and mental health and well-being. Ultimately, the scheme aims to acknowledge the suffering and improve the circumstances of former residents of mother and baby homes, which is why it is wrong that up to 13,000 survivors living here in Britain today risk losing their benefits if they accept this compensation. Under our current rules, any money accepted through this payment scheme would be considered savings and could see them lose mean-tested benefits and financial support for social care. For some, it is deterring them from making any application at all. It's one of the reasons why only 5% of survivors in Britain have applied so far. And for others, having received a compensation offer, They are now having to weigh up whether it is worth accepting the money or if to do so would sink them into a worse financial situation overall. This includes a survivor from the north of England who has shared her story with me. This woman, who experienced harrowing abuse over several years, applied to the payment scheme in September of last year and received an offer soon after. She told me, "When I first heard about the payment scheme, I thought that it was marvellous and I was excited. I couldn't take it in. I had never had any money at any point in my life. I was going to use this money to visit a half-brother in America. He had been born less than 16 miles away, but I did not know that him or his brother and sister existed until we did some family tracing. It would have been lovely to meet him, but I do not feel that I can use the money for this as my benefits would be affected." The whole point of the payment scheme was to recognise the suffering that survivors experienced while resident, but for many, it has become an additional burden, a process which has forced them to revisit their most traumatic experiences, but seemingly to no avail. But fortunately, there is a solution, and it is a relatively simple one. The introduction of an indefinite capital disregard, which my bill is proposing, would remove any risk to an applicant's benefits. And there is also strong precedent for this, with the same arrangements having been applied to similar special compensation schemes in the recent past. They include those introduced for the victims of the 7/7 London bombings and payments made under the Windrush compensation scheme. Madam Deputy Speaker, before I conclude, I want to pay tribute to some of the many incredible organisations in Britain that continue to support mother and baby home survivors. This includes Rosa and the team at Irish in Britain, Sean and the team at the London Irish Centre in Camden, the Irish Cultural Centre in Hammersmith, the Freya Network, supporting the Irish community in Leeds, Manchester, Merseyside and beyond, Coventry Irish Society, Luton Irish Forum, Irish Network Stevenage and many more. And finally, I would like to pay tribute to mother and baby home survivors, here in Britain, in Ireland and elsewhere, who summoned the courage to share their personal experiences, to recount their most traumatic years in the name of justice. Their bravery not only secured the apology from the Irish government and subsequently brought about the payment scheme, but also, and perhaps more importantly, has contributed enormously to the hard and crucial work of dismantling the stigma and secrecy that has long been associated with time spent in mother and baby homes. This, of course, includes Filamina Lee, whose own story brought this injustice to a global audience, and I am delighted that Filamina's daughter Jane and her grandson Joshua are here in the chamber with us today. Madam Deputy Speaker, Ireland's mother and baby homes were cruel institutions. Over 7 decades, tens of thousands of Irish women were sent there for the perceived sin of becoming pregnant outside of marriage. They were subjected to the most horrific mistreatment and abuse, physical and psychological. Women were used as unpaid labour. They had their children forcibly adopted, sometimes overseas, never to be seen again. The women and children fortunate enough to leave the institutions often came here to Britain. They came here to escape the stigma and shame and build a new life. And there are more than 13,000 survivors living here today. Last year, the Irish government opened a long-awaited compensation scheme for those survivors. It is a small but important mark of accountability and redress for what happened to them. But thousands of survivors in Britain today cannot access this compensation without being penalised for it. If they do, they will lose any means-tested benefits or financial support for social care. Just as we did for the Windrush families, we must now change the law to ensure that compensation payments for victims and survivors are ring-fenced. This bill, Filamina's Law, named after the inspirational and courageous Filamina Lee, will achieve that. I am proud to bring it to the House today, and I hope in the months ahead we will see a change in the law so we can deliver justice for survivors and show them the kindness and respect they have so often been denied in life. Thank you.
The question is, please be seated, Ms. Conlon. The question is that the honourable member has leave to bring in the bill, As many in that opinion say aye? Many in that opinion say aye? The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Liam Conlon, Claire Hanna, Colin Eastwood, Deirdre Costigan, Lola McAvoy, Damien Egan, Uma Kamaran, Sarah Coombs, Helena Dollymore, Florence Eshalomi, Tom Rutland and Rachel Hopkins.
Liam Conlon. Very steady, very steady.
Thank you. Mother and Baby Institutions Payment Scheme Report Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, 28th of March.
Friday, the 28th of March.
Yeah.
Well done, well done. The front banks are shuffling over very quickly. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Employment Rights Bill, as amended in the Public Bill Committee, to be further considered. Now,
we will begin with Clause 39, with which it will be convenient to consider new clauses, amendments and new schedules as listed on the selection paper for Day 2. I call the Minister to move new Clause 39. Minister Justin Madison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the clause be read a second time. First of all, can I declare my register of interest, membership and financial interest in trade unions, as I have done throughout the passage of this bill? And can I thank all members in all parts of the House for their contributions to yesterday's debate? I look forward to another good debate today as we work together to ensure this bill works in practice for workers and businesses of all sizes across the whole country. Similar to yesterday, I will use my opening remarks to explain to the House the amendments put forward by the Government in parts 4 and 5 of the bill. The Government is moving a number of amendments which represent a significant step forward in modernising our industrial framework. Amendments to Clause 50 will strengthen the provisions of trade union access right. They will ensure the framework functions effectively and deliver on our commitment to modernise working practices. They will streamline access provisions by allowing a single CAC member to make a fast-track decision on whether access should take place. In making a decision about whether it is a single person or a panel who will consider the application, the CAC will be required to have regard to the complexity of the case, as well as whether the proposed terms of the agreement are model terms, various criteria which will be prescribed in secondary legislation following consultation. They will also clarify that supporting a worker is a legitimate purpose for access and provide a power to bring forward secondary legislation to make further provision as to how the CAC is to determine the level of penalty fines for non-compliance with access agreements. And it will expand access rights, enabling access agreements to cover communicating with workers in ways that don't involve entering premises, for example, connecting digitally using technology, therefore modernising our antiquated industrial relations framework. New Clause 39, new Schedule 2 and associated amendments insert new provisions into the bill, replacing Clause 51, and will address unfair practices and access arrangements in the recognition and derecognition process. They will extend the application of unfair practice protections to the point at which the CAC accepts an application for recognition or derecognition and ensures employers cannot increase the size of the bargaining unit for the purposes of the recognition application after the application is made. This will end the deliberate gaming of the system that we have seen in recent years. It will also delete the second test for determining an unfair practice complaint, which currently requires the CAC to consider how an alleged unfair practice may have affected workers' votes in the recognition or derecognition ballot. It will extend the time limit in which unfair practices can be reported after the ballot closes to 5 working days. It will ensure that an employer cannot recognise a non-independent trade union after receiving a request for voluntary recognition from an independent trade union as a means of thwarting the independent trade union's subsequent application to the CAC for statutory recognition. And it will bring forward and formalise the process for agreeing access arrangements between the employer and the union during the recognition and derecognition process. These amendments will streamline the recognition process, reduce opportunities for unfair practices to occur, and ensure unions seek recognition have a fair and transparent statutory route to enable them to do so. Today's amendments in terms of industrial action rules will reduce the costly, complex and bureaucratic requirements on unions in relation to industrial action and ballot notices, whilst ensuring that employers have the necessary notice and information to prepare for industrial action. New Clause 42 will simplify notices to employers of industrial action ballots and industrial action, reducing the chance of spurious challenge and making the information required more proportionate. New Clause 43 will extend industrial action mandates from 6 to 12 months, reducing the need for repeated ballots, and amendments to Clause 61 will mean the notice period for industrial action will be set at 10 days, giving businesses time to prepare while safeguarding workers' rights. Amendments to Clause 58 mean that the 50% ballot turnout threshold repeal will be subject to commencement on a date to be set in secondary legislation. Turning now to political fund ballots, new Clause 40 and associated amendments remove the requirement for unions to hold a ballot every 10 years on maintaining a political fund. Instead, unions will provide reminders about members' right to opt out every 10 years, ensuring transparency without imposing costly and time-consuming ballots. Moving now to the Fair Work Agency, the bill will bring together the various agencies and enforcement bodies that enforce employment rights into the new Fair Work Agency to ensure that where employers are not doing what is right, a simplified and strengthened enforcement system will protect workers and ensure justice in the workplace. The Fair Work Agency needs to have the right tools to do the job. This is a series of amendments that forms a package that will give the Fair Work Agency those tools that it needs to hold all employers to account more effectively. That is fair for workers and it is fair for businesses too. The Government is moving amendments to introduce new powers that are key to the Fair Work Agency's core enforcement role. New clauses 44 to 56 create a civil penalty regime. Under this regime, enforcement officers will be able to issue notices of underpayment and impose a penalty on employers where they have underpaid individuals in breach of statutory pay rights that are within the remit of the Fair Work Agency. As a result, the Fair Work Agency may be able to help workers get the money they are owed more quickly than if they had to go through an employment tribunal. But in other cases where proceedings before the tribunal are necessary, we want the Fair Work Agency to be able to support individuals and ensure the tribunal's time is used as effectively as possible. New Clause 57 does that by enabling the Fair Work Agency to bring proceedings before the Employment Tribunal if individuals are unwilling or unable to. Under Clause 58, the Fair Work Agency will also be able to offer an advice assistance to individuals bringing employment-related cases before the courts or tribunals. The Government is also moving amendments to upgrade the powers the Fair Work Agency will need to tackle labour abuse effectively. The committee heard from stakeholders including Eleanor Lyons, the UK Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, about bad practices in the social care sector, but currently the Gangmaster and Labour Abuse Authority is prevented from investigating many cases because they don't meet the modern slavery threshold. The Fraud Act covers situations that amount to labour abuse but actually fall short of modern slavery. So today we are bringing forward two amendments which will deliver the Government's commitment to give the Fair Work Agency the strong powers it needs to tackle labour exploitation. Firstly, we will enable the Fair Work Agency enforcement officers to use their powers to investigate such cases, helping the Fair Work Agency to protect the most vulnerable in the workforce. And further, we will give enforcement officers the ability to issue special warnings following arrest. In practice, that means telling suspects that if they refuse to answer questions about certain items or their whereabouts, this could be used against them in court.
On that point,
yeah.
Grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. There's only been 21 employers prosecuted for national minimum wage violations since 2007. The measures that he's bringing forward, I think, will improve enforcement, but he touched on the Modern Slavery Act. He didn't address the points that were made in the debate yesterday. Will he now use this opportunity to say a little bit more about the Government's intention to update the Modern Slavery Act?
Minister.
I'm grateful for the Shadow Select Committee's interventions. I think we do accept that there are gaps between the modern slavery network enforcement processes and indeed what we currently have in terms of employment rights enforcement. So we are working with the Home Office and the GLAA to improve that. These are things that we can continue to work on in due course as we develop the scope and remit of the Fair Work Agency. And as well as reforming and strengthening the powers, the government is moving amendments to expand their remit to the Fair Work Agency to ensure effective enforcement of statutory sick pay and holiday pay. Today's amendments will bring Northern Ireland SSP legislation into the scope of the Fair Work Agency and introduce a requirement for the Secretary of State to obtain the consent of the Northern Ireland Executive before bringing any further devolved legislation in scope. Further amendments will bring the new duty in the working time regulations for employers to retain records relating to holiday pay and annual leave for 6 years within the scope of the Fair Work Agency. It is also the government's intention for the Fair Work Agency to take on enforcement for new protections in relation to zero-hours contracts, which is subject to a consultation on the detail and the outcome of the spending review. New Clause 60 creates a power for the Fair Work Agency to recover the cost of taking enforcement action against businesses that are found to be non-compliant with the law. This is in recognition of the polluters pays principle and is similar to how other regulators operate, such as the Health and Safety Executive. And of course, we will consider carefully and discuss with businesses as appropriate before exercising this power. But we do think it's an important principle that where there is wrong, that the person in the wrong pays some contribution towards the taxpayers' costs in enforcing the law. So to sum up, Madam Deputy Speaker, I know there are many people eager to speak in the debate today, which will ensure workplace rights are fit for a modern economy, empower working people and contribute to economic growth. I urge members to support this bill and the amendments we are moving today, which will show that we are pro-business, pro-worker, pro-family and pro-growth.
Trade union recognition.
The question is that the new clause 39 be read a second time. I call the Shadow Minister, Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So, ahead of getting into detail of the many amendments that we have before us this afternoon that the Minister rattled through in but 10 minutes, overnight we learnt that the government are moving the responsibilities of one quango to another. That is, moving the payment systems regulator to the Financial Conduct Authority, putting one quango into another which conveniently already share a building. The Prime Minister has hailed this as the latest step in the government's attempt to kickstart growth. And that is why it's relevant to the amendments we have this afternoon that do the very opposite. And the Chancellor said, the regulatory system has become burdensome to the point of choking off innovation, investment and growth. The precise things this bill does. I do not know how they can say this with a straight face when we today stand here with a £5 billion cost to businesses of blocking regulatory burdens on every business, small, medium and large in this land.
In the chamber yesterday, Madam Deputy Speaker, it was quite clear that the Minister and his team opposite didn't fully understand what the definition of a small business was. I'm sure that my honourable friend on our front benches absolutely does understand. And does he agree with me? This is fundamental to understanding why the balance of this piece of legislation is wrong.
My right honourable friend makes a superb point, as she always does. Certainly every single small business in my own constituency that I talk to are very, very concerned about the measures in this. Well, I will give way to the Minister if after 24 hours later he is actually able to name a small business that supports this bill.
Is there 24 hours to
Well, I'm asking the Minister to give way, Shadow Minister to give way, because of course the backbencher could have intervened on me during the time I was speaking. But one of the reasons why there's so much confusion about a small business is because the Shadow Minister actually moved an amendment in Bill Committee to define a small business as being an organisation or person employing 500 or more employees. So if there's any confusion, it's on that side.
Is it the best you can do?
24 hours later, and he still can't name a small business that supports this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker. It shows how out of their depth this trade union government actually is when it comes to supporting the businesses in this land. In the words of the Chancellor herself, this bill is choking off innovation, investment and growth. To pretend otherwise, they are taking the public for fools. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I turn firstly to new clauses 89 and new clause 90. Almost everything this government has done is contradictory to the objective of growth, if that remains their objective this week. Whether it is the National Insurance Jobs Tax, the changes to business rates, or this bill itself, everything seemingly goes against growing the economy. It is therefore little surprise that under Labour, the economy is flatlining. The Prime Minister said earlier this year, he said that everything the government does will be subject to a growth test. However, the details of this test have been sparse at best. So sparse, in fact, that you may well think it doesn't exist. And there is no greater evidence...
Will he give way?
I will give way.
Mike Martin.
I thank him for giving way. Could he describe Liz Truss's growth test?
Well,
cut
red tape for a start. But I think what we see from the... I think what we see, Madam Deputy Speaker, from the Liberal Democrat benches is that the orange book tradition of the Liberal Democrats is well and truly dead, and they now position themselves firmly to the left of the Labour Party. There is no greater evidence that the growth test does not exist than this bill itself. For if such a test did exist, this bill would fall at the first hurdle. But today, I come with good news. For I have two amendments that they can back this afternoon. Two amendments that will help them to grow the economy. Those amendments are, of course, new clause 89 and new clause 90. New clause 89 will require the certification officer to advance the objectives of the international competitiveness of the economy, and new clause 90 will require the Secretary of State, not in his place again today, to have regard for international competitiveness when passing regulations under Part 4 of this bill concerning the trade unions. The government has been asking regulators for ideas to boost growth. Contradiction in terms to ask the regulator to boost growth, but we are happy to help them on their quest. These amendments should be the ones that the government can support. If the government can't support these amendments, it shows that they are not serious about economic growth. And more tellingly, it shows that they do not intend to use the powers in Part 4 of this bill to achieve growth or international economic competitiveness, because they do not intend to exercise the powers compatibly with these objectives. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I move to new clause 88. It is one that I'm sure will get them a little bit hot under the collar regarding trade union political funds. For this government is a Labour Party first, country second government. Nowhere is this clearer than in the changes that the government are making to the political fund with this bill. Let us be in no doubt. These changes are designed with one simple purpose: to bolster the coffers of the Labour Party. Clause 52 will mean that members of trade unions will automatically contribute to their trade union's political fund without being asked about it first. They will have to opt out rather than, at present, opt in. If trade union subscriptions are... Did someone want to try and defend that? No? OK. Clause 52 will mean that members of trade unions will automatically contribute to their trade union political fund without being asked about it. If trade union subscriptions are to be used for party political campaigning, it should be a conscious decision of the trade union member to endorse such campaigning. And I'd be delighted.
The Shadow Minister may recall from the Bill Committee that every single Labour member of that committee declared sponsorship from the trade union movement. And does the Shadow Minister agree with me that this clause is simply payback for the trade union movement for their financial support for the Labour sector?
Greg Smith.
My honourable friend served assiduously during the course of the Bill Committee, raising many good points, including the one that he just made that I absolutely agree with. And the public will be asking serious questions about this. If the honourable gentleman wants to try and defend this, I will give him the opportunity.
My interest, Madam Deputy Speaker, as a member of 3 trade unions. I got less than the honourable gentleman, the Shadow Minister, got from small business, which I think his declaration is 12,500. Did he feel the need to declare that, given he's now making a case against legislation that would impact that particular company?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm making a point about the trade union movement, something that I have never been a part of and certainly never received any money for. But I'm happy for the honourable gentleman to look at all of my declarations in the register of interest.
Is it really a point of order?
Well, we can find out, Madam Deputy Speaker. I believe it is. On a point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker, could you advise whether those members opposite that receive money from businesses that are affected by this legislation should be making a declaration the same way that us trade unions are?
This is going to end up in a back and forth on things that aren't a matter for the chair. Declarations are the responsibility of individual members to make appropriately through the right processes. Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And for the avoidance of all doubt and all transparency, I will declare all of my entries in the register of interest for all to look at. They are all there for anybody to see. Once more.
Sir Julian.
This argument about opting in and opting out of trade union levies goes back at least to the 1970s and probably beyond, when I remember arguing about it as an undergraduate. If there are to be levies that you have to opt out of, a defensible case can be made for them, provided the process of opting out is easy and is advertised to every member. Does my honourable friend know whether the government proposes to institute mechanisms to make it known to every member how easily they can opt out?
Great.
My right honourable friend makes an incredibly important point on this, because if you look at the detail of this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, what is very clear and obvious is that the government are trying to make it as difficult as possible for people to opt out of the trade union political fund. That is the very point of them changing this legislation. And opt-in, I'm going to make a bit of progress and then I will come to the honourable lady. An opt-in is the default under consumer protection law and information law. Combined with the 10-year reminder change, it is highly likely that many trade union members will not be aware that their subscriptions are being used in this way, and that they are eligible to save money on their trade union fees by not being a member of the political fund. Despite all the talk of supporting working people, it is clear that concern simply does not apply when working people's money is being taken to fund the Labour Party and other political causes. We have tabled Amendment 291 because we fundamentally believe that people should consent explicitly what is, in effect, to a subscription trap. Amendment 291 simply maintains the status quo. It is the right thing to do. The Secretary of State for Business and Trade... OK.
Many thanks, and thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I draw attention to my register of interest, my membership of Community in Usdaw. Can the honourable gentleman tell us how many times that such a ballot has actually resulted in the closure of a political fund?
The honourable lady is putting a smoke and mirrors argument up here to try and cover the fact that they are changing the status quo of an opt-in system to an opt-out system. To me, it is just straightforward common sense that something like this people would expect to have to opt into, not this particularly egregious case of every 10 years being casually reminded that, well, maybe they could save a bit of money by opting out to a cause that perhaps they don't even agree with in the first place. The Secretary of State for Business and Trade pledged, in fact, to end auto-renewal subscriptions. Because when this side were in government, we passed the Digital Markets, Competition and Consumers Bill. This contained 2 significant proposals on subscription contracts that are notable here. Reminder notices that businesses need to provide notices to consumers to remind them that their subscription contract will renew and that payment will be due unless the consumer cancels. And secondly, to allow consumers to be able to exit a subscription contract in a straightforward, cost-effective and timely way. Businesses will need to ensure that the process for terminating is not unduly onerous and that consumers can signal their intent to end the contract through a single communication. Now, the Labour Party, then in opposition, supported those aims. In fact, the bill did not go far enough for them at the time. During report stage, the Honourable Member for Pontypridd tabled new Clause 29, which the Labour Party voted to add to the bill. This new clause had a 2-pronged approach. It required traders to ask consumers whether they wished to opt into subscriptions renewing automatically, either after a period of 6 months and every 6 months thereafter, or if the period between the consumer being charged for the first and second time is longer than 6 months, each time payment is due. The second limb of that new clause that the Labour Party used to support would have required that if the consumer did not opt into the arrangement just described, the trader had to provide a date by which the consumer must notify the trader of the consumer's intention to renew the contract, which must be no earlier than 28 days before the renewal date. If the consumer did not provide the notification, the subscription contract could not renew. So where am I going with this, Madam Deputy Speaker? They're chuntering too early. They're chuntering too early. Because there's a considerable shift in the Labour Party's policy position on subscription traps. The Labour Party seems to believe that consumers should be given every possible opportunity to cancel subscription contracts with businesses, but it should be as hard as possible to cancel a subscription to the Trade Union Political Fund. That is why we've tabled Amendment 292 and new Clause 88, so that members of trade unions receive the same rights that Labour pushed for other individuals with a subscription. Madam Deputy Speaker, moving to New Schedule 2. New Schedule 2 is just another amendment that could be used to give sweeping powers to the trade union paymasters of those on the benches sat opposite me. It will give the Secretary of State powers to reduce the threshold for trade union recognition to as low as just 2% of the workforce. By doing so, trade unions could easily be imposed on workplaces across the country, with small employers being particularly vulnerable. For example, in a workplace of 200 workers, less than five would be required for workplace recognition. Paired with the other measures in this bill, this will strike fear into business owners across Britain who could now be forced to deal with all-powerful trade unions as part of Labour's return to the 1970s. But the way Labour have gone about this is just another example of the shoddy nature of this bill and Labour's approach to workplace regulations. As the Attorney-General has said, excessive reliance on delegated powers, Henry VIII clauses or skeleton legislation upsets the proper balance between Parliament and the Executive. This not only strikes at the rule of law values, and quoting her, I have already outlined, but also at the cardinal principles of accessibility and legal certainty. So I move on, Madam Deputy Speaker, to talk about facility time through Amendments 293 and 295, which would leave out Clause 54. Facilities provided to trade union officials and learning representatives, and leave out Clause 55, facilities for equality representatives. These amendments will remove those aforementioned clauses and to remove the requirement to provide reasonable time off for facilities time, the removal of the creation of facilities time for equalities representatives, and removes clauses that will reduce transparency requirements over facilities time, respectively. And then Amendment 296, which is together with these to prevent facility time for equality representatives from being provided unless the relevant public sector organisation is meeting its statutory targets for performance. Trade union facility time, Madam Deputy Speaker, already costs the government nearly £100 million a year. Under the last Labour government, the civil service spent 0.26% of its annual pay bill on facility time, compared to 0.04% in the private sector. In the civil service, the average was 0.05% in 2022 to 2023, under the last Conservative government. And Labour councils, Madam Deputy Speaker, are still the worst culprit. The transparency data collected by the government in 22-23 shows that the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan's Transport for London, has 881 full-time equivalent union officials on the books, costing £8 million a year. Bankrupt Labour-run Birmingham City Council has 30 full-time equivalent union officials on its central books, costing £1.2 million. It's no wonder they went bankrupt. And further, 12 full-time equivalents in its maintained schools, costing £583,000. But Clause 54 and 55 will increase this cost by giving more time off to public sector union officials at the taxpayers' expense. That is not right when the Chancellor is asking ministers to make cuts to their departments across the board, meaning that public services will be worse with the taxpayer expected to contribute more. Furthermore, this bill extends that right to equality representatives, who will now be allowed paid time off work to carry out activities for the purposes of promoting value of equality in the workplace, arrange learning or training matters relating to equality in the workplace, provide information, advice or support to qualifying members of the trade union in relation to matters relating to equality in the workplace, consult with the employer on matters relating to equality in the workplace, and obtain and analyse information relating to equality in the workplace. All noble goals, but that should not be done at the taxpayer's expense. I make no...
Does the Shadow Minister agree with me that the only jobs that will be created by these bills are those people employed by trades unions?
Before Mr Smith returns to respond to that, I must add we've got shy of 40 people hoping to contribute. Just a little notice that we want to get them all in.
I, as ever, take your advice, Madam Deputy Speaker, and will speed up. But will first say, the Minister urges me to carry on. I, of course, would not ignore your advice. Well, never say never again. Anyway, I make no comment on the value of these activities will add to public sector employers and their productivity. But what I would say is that we have already seen this government happy to hand over large pay increases to trade unions with no guarantee of anything in return. That is why we have tabled Amendments 293, 295 and 296 in an attempt to make sure the taxpayer is getting something out of this latest concession to the trade unions. As briefly as I can, Madam Deputy Speaker, on Amendment 297, trade unions can create significant disruption in the economy, whether stopping work from taking place or preventing people from getting to work or school or to hospital appointments or many other activities. That is why it is important that a fair balance is struck between the ability of trade unions to strike and the public we all serve. Our Amendment 297 will mean that vital public services such as the NHS can better plan and prepare for strikes. It simply seeks to keep the status quo of 2 weeks' notice. Without adequate warning, constituents of members from across the House are more likely to miss hospital appointments, not be able to travel to see loved ones, or get to work, or suffer greater disruption when schools close due to strikes. That is part of the reason why in the consultation on thresholds, 58% of those who responded support, Madam Deputy Speaker, retaining the 14-day period as it currently is, with only 7% preferring a longer period. Two-thirds of respondents wanted the period to stay the same or longer. Labour promised they would work with business on this bill, but their response to the consultation is just another example of them having their fingers in their ears and simply not listening. The reduction to 10 days is against the wishes of business, will do harm to all of our constituents, and that is why we have tabled Amendment 297 to retain the notice period at 14 days. On Amendment 299, very briefly, strikes should only take place when there is a clear mandate for them. But Clause 58 will mean that strikes can happen with low thresholds by removing the 50% turnout requirement and the 40% support requirement. Combined with government amendments to extend the mandate for strikes from 6 months to 12, this bill allows unions to unleash waves of low support rolling strikes. These costs will come on top of the National Insurance Jobs Tax and changes to business rates, mistakes the government are already making and making running a business more difficult, which is why we have tabled Amendment 299 to remove Clause 58. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is much in this bill to talk to. I will not test your patience or the patience of the House further by going into them, but I look forward to a thorough debate, not least from the benches behind me, to further point out why the amendments the government have put down in this bill this afternoon will harm our economy, destroy jobs and just give more power to the trade unions.
Yeah. Point of order.
Mr Mayhew, is it pertinent to this actual debate?
Yes.
Point of order, Jerome Mayhew.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as we all know, members are required to draw attention to any potential conflicts of interest prior to speaking to avoid any impression, amongst other things, of paid advocacy. Given that Clause 52 will lead directly to increased payment of money from unions to Labour members of Parliament, I ask for guidance on the proper declaration of interests. Most members of the party opposite listed to speak this afternoon have received thousands of pounds from the unions. Totted up, I make it £283,974.86. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, in addition to the general reference to their register of interests, in this instance where there is this direct link, should they also set out the actual amount of money that they have received?
There's obviously some further clarity required on this, as it was raised earlier on. It is the responsibility of individual members to ensure that they declare their interest properly. The procedure for raising a complaint of this sort is by writing to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. The guide to the rules sets out the rules relating to the declaration of interest in the debate. This is not otherwise a matter for the Chair. Hopefully that brings some further clarity to that issue. Now, Chair of the Select Committee, Liam Venn.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you very much indeed for calling me. I'll start with my declaration of interest as a former member of the CBI and indeed a current member of the trade union Unison. Let me just try and bring a few points of consensus. I'm old enough to remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, when members opposite, like the former member for Harlow, were writing pamphlets for think tanks like Demos, with titles like "Stop the Union Bashing," "Why Conservatives Should Embrace the Trade Union Movement." And of course, that was an echo of something Harold Macmillan used to say in the 1950s. In the 1950s, Harold Macmillan famously said, we used to think that we couldn't have a modern industrial society without trade unions. I still think that. So I think we would all benefit from just a little bit of acknowledgement that industrial relations in this country have not been in a good place. In fact, in 2023, there were more days lost to strikes than at any point in the last 30 years. At the back end of 2022, Madam Deputy Speaker, the ONS calculated that 2.5 million days had been lost to strike action. That is not a record that any one of us in this House should be proud of. It is incumbent on all of us to modernise industrial relations in this country so that we are not divided in this way in the workplace. So I welcome the measures in this bill, and I hope that the Minister will actually use the moment, seize the moment, the fact that we have not only got this bill, but also the advent of an industrial strategy that is going to bring together governance arrangements that get businesses and unions around the table to talk about economic growth in our country. That's a big moment. It's a big opportunity. It's a big moment when actually we can bring together our country around a modern industrial strategy. And I hope the Minister when he has got this bill done and had a little bit of a rest, maybe gone on holiday for a bit, we'll actually think about how I will in a moment, how we bring together, how the government will then publish a modern industrial strategy for the future, backed by a restoration of some of the data that we used to have in this country, such as the Workplace Employee Survey, which we used to have until about 2012, until it was stopped. We need to be more thoughtful about harmony in the workplace because it is in the interest of the constituents that we serve. I give way to the honourable member.
I thank the right honourable member for giving way, and he used the term modernising industrial relations, which does sound like a little bit of a euphemism, but to take him at his word on that, is he therefore not surprised that in the pay rises that have come since this government has come in for doctors and for train drivers and a number of other unions, no requirement for increased productivity has been put alongside those pay increases? Surely if we're going to have a modernised industrial relations, it should be combining increased pay that they want, but also the productivity gains that this country needs.
Lieber.
Well, the honourable member no doubt will have heard the remarks made by the Chancellor of the Duchy of the Exchequer at the weekend. And of course, I suspect he will see, like every member of this House will see, some pretty radical steps taken in the Comprehensive Spending Review to improve the efficiency of the civil service, which of course grew very significantly in the years after COVID and now has to be reinvented for new times. So I'm confident that those productivity gains will come. So the second point, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I wanted to make was to draw the House's attention to some of the evidence that we took in the Select Committee and in the report, which I commend to all honourable members, because what struck me in the evidence that we heard from the most productive firms in the country, firms like Jaguar Land Rover, like Rolls-Royce, like British Aerospace, these are world-beating companies. These are some of the most productive companies in our country. And what characterises the workplace arrangements in all of those companies is that they have very long-standing, very robust, very deep partnerships with good trade unions. And those trade unions help make decisions, they help deconflict things, and they help businesses thrive and succeed. And that's why stronger collective rights are important. We also, I'm afraid to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, took evidence from companies where there was not that harmony. Companies like Amazon, a company that has had to call ambulances to its warehouses 1,400 times in just 5 years, where we on the committee received whistleblower evidence from workers who were literally having to urinate into bottles because they did not dare take time out from their tasks to go to the bathroom and back, where we heard all kinds of whistleblower complaints around injuries that were being sustained, where pay is rising much slower than sales. But when we had executives from the company in front of us, they could not or would not tell the committee why strike action had been taken by workers in their firms. I have to say, if a company executive cannot explain to a select committee in this House why so many of its workers are on strike, that is not a story of harmony. That's not a recipe for success. And that's why I think the measures that the Minister has brought forward in this bill to improve the opportunities for trade unions to organise in a way actually that was recommended by the former honourable member for Harlow are a good thing. Now, the Minister has gone some way in recognising recommendations made by our committee, such as improving beyond 24 hours the window in which complaints can be heard, template access agreements, and strengthening the role of CAC in dispute resolution. But there was just one step further that I would suggest, which is the subject of Amendment 282, which is where we suggest that access rights for trade unions do indeed include digital access rights. Because in the modern workplace, and Amazon was a case in point, at the moment there simply isn't an opportunity for workers to get information about the opportunities to join a trade union and make a fair choice one way or the other in the way that there could be in the modern economy. The final point, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I wanted to make was around enforcement. The first Factory Act passed by this House was the Act of 1802, which was the Health and Morals of Apprentices Act. It was celebrated in parliamentary history as an act that failed because there was no enforcement attached to it. Enforcement of this bill is absolutely essential if it is to succeed. But today, labour market enforcement is much too weak. Just 21 employers have been prosecuted for minimum wage enforcement since 2007, despite the fact that we all know in our constituencies there are abuses of this sort taking place. Spending on labour market enforcers has been flat since 2014, and we are well off the ILO target of one labour market inspector for every 10,000 workers. And so new clause 82 in my name requires the Secretary of State to set out a roadmap for reaching that ILO target, for ensuring there is greater use of penalties where appropriate, and for much stronger partnerships between the Home Office and the police and the Fair Work Agency. We cannot have in this country a situation where the best of British firms are being undercut by the worst labour market practice in the country. So, in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome this bill. I think there are some amendments that have been tabled today which would improve it. But ultimately, we have got to remember that if we want to create a genuinely pro-business, pro-worker economy, then the measures in this bill are long overdue.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak to parts 4 and 5 of the bill, and specifically new clause 19, which is tabled in the name of my honourable friend, the member for Torbay, and new clauses 110, 111 and 112 tabled in my name. And I'd just like to put on record my thanks to my 2 Liberal Democrat colleagues, the honourable members for Torbay and Chippenham, for their work on the Bill Committee, alongside many other members of this House. Madam Deputy Speaker, overall, throughout the passage of this bill, we Liberal Democrats have indicated our support for many aspects of the Employment Rights Bill, as was debated yesterday, boosting statutory sick pay, strengthening parental pay and leave, and giving people on 0 and low hours contracts more certainty. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, a lot of crucial detail has been left for secondary legislation, for lots of new government amendments and continuing consultations, which make it impossible to explicitly endorse the bill as a whole at this stage. Even with 264 amendments at committee stage and 457 government amendments at report stage, there are still major issues that are yet to be determined, especially in Part 4. Even after all of these amendments, the government says that the government intends to consult further on modernising the trade union landscape following royal assent of the Employment Rights Bill, including on admissibility requirements, a code of practice and secondary legislation. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's clear that Part 4 of the bill, which we are debating today, is still far from finalised. We Liberal Democrats believe that employee participation in the workplace is vitally important, but we also believe it should go hand in hand with wider employee ownership. This is so important for diffusing economic power, promoting enterprise, increasing job satisfaction, improving service to customers, and getting long-term economic stability and growth. The government's proposals on trade unions are really aimed at strengthening employee rights in what can often be a combative and confrontational working environment. And we Liberal Democrats see this bill as a missed opportunity to improve employee engagement and ownership that can provide collaborative working environments and long-term growth, whether that's through reforming company purpose rules or putting a duty on employers to encourage employee ownership in large listed companies. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, given what we have before us, there are a few amendments that we have tabled. The first is NC 19, the right to be accompanied. It does what it says on the tin. It would expand the right for staff to be accompanied by a certified companion at disciplinary and grievance hearings. This is long-standing Liberal Democrat policy, and I hope is not too controversial, as it simply rectifies an anomaly. At the moment, the current law allows only trade union representatives or colleagues to accompany an employee, and this leaves many other employees without proper support. Some sectors, like the medical professional, already allow accompaniment by non-union companions, yet this is not reflected in law. Our targeted amendment would fix this anomaly, and I urge the government to accept it. New clause 110. This simply requests the government to conduct a review into the impact on small business. Madam Deputy Speaker, throughout the passage of this bill, we have raised concerns about the cumulative impact of all of the government's work in this area and the impact that it will have on small businesses in particular. Just the other day, the Federation of Small Businesses told me that they spend thousands of hours, thousands and thousands of hours, giving advice to small businesses on employment matters. And these new obligations will create a huge amount of extra law for them to understand, to interpret and apply. Small businesses do not have the same resources as big business. They often don't have a legal department, no compliance team, perhaps no HR specialist. But because small businesses are often rooted in their community, they are really conscious of their reputation. They know their employees and they want to get things right. This means that it's going to take extra time, effort and cost for them to navigate and comply with this part of the bill. And that's before we get to everything else, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the government is seeking to introduce. Taking together the measures of the employment bill, the national insurance, the business rates changes and everything else, small businesses are telling me that they feel overwhelmed. All this clause does is ask the government to conduct an impact assessment. We know that small businesses are passionate about their employees. Small businesses are often the ones to give people their first job ever. They're often the companies that give people a second chance. They provide part-time, flexible working and opportunities to return to work. So I encourage the government to look at the impact of Part 4 on small businesses. New Clause 111, Madam Deputy Speaker, is about introducing legal aid in employment tribunals. Now, when legal aid was first introduced, it was regarded as, or the intention was, for it to become the NHS of the justice system. But we know that today legal aid is far from that. Our amendment would require the Secretary of State to report on options for expanding the right to legal aid in employment tribunals. We already know that many employees cannot afford legal representation, and this creates an imbalance of power when facing well-resourced employers. This amendment simply asks the government to look at the options that might be available in this regard. And new clause 112 is looking at asking for a review of the single enforcement body. Now, we Liberal Democrats positively support the government's efforts to create a single point of contact rather than 4. A similar measure was in our manifesto, where we called for a powerful new worker protection enforcement authority. But as a matter of good practice, when putting different organisations together, it is important to make sure that no gaps are created in that protection. So this is not just a formality, but I think an important safeguard to ensure that employment rights enforcement is effective, fair and fit for purpose. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is much in the employment bill that we Liberal Democrats welcome, but there are many areas that we simply cannot support because it is not clear yet what the government's intentions are. We do urge the government in the strongest possible terms to look at the impact on small business, as this is one area that we are deeply concerned about. Thank you.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak in this debate this afternoon and following the honourable member from Maid, Buckinghamshire, the Shadow Minister. I've got to remind him, Madam Deputy Speaker, that trade unionists are the bedrock
tell you, the guy that I needed to tell you. Okay, can I give you something? So I found the phone that I thought was lost.
It's going to be like live on PA.
Yeah, it's Wilfredo. So I give it. Yeah. Great. Kimberly, I think is over at Poet. So teleconference there, and when are we going to? No.
Are you taking time off next week? Or are you going to go straight back into it?
I went in Monday. He wasn't here. I'm like, remember our appointment? I kind of low.
I am actually going to New York after this. They're actually a fantastic organisation to work for, yeah. Really good at being able to bounce back. Huh? There you go, they can click on me up. So yeah. But it's nice, it's really nice. I've booked myself into this hilarious, I don't know how to describe it. There's nothing to say, like a pop, hip-hop dance class. On Sunday night. I was like, what would I like? Because I'm in New York for a night by myself. So I was like, what would I love to do? And I was like, I love stories. Yeah, okay, but I did.
The car usually comes from in there, doesn't it? Yeah. What are we going to have the car blocked?
Ontario? Yeah. Windsor, oh, Windsor Castle. Windsor and Buckingham. So the house at Windsor.
And which one's the white shirt? Yeah, I saw him in Ireland. And we met there, but I can't remember. And which one is the song? The short bill. He's with New York Times. Oh, it isn't. Oh,
A sign would be the coordinates.
okay, gotcha.
See how the coordinates are still
Yes. They're still Eddie's kind of. Can't forget.
Well, I think that's because the car leaves, and then people are like, "Oh, look, this is awesome!" And then you guys are all getting the awesome couch.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
That's very cute. I like this, but
Yeah, there'll be a lot of people at Shamrock. No, basically on this bill, the number one thing that I think, which is in part, whenever the president whenever the
That's what I thought I would be able to
drop. You know what breakfast.
8 to half 9 and the t-shirt goes out to half 10. Oh, right, okay. I thought they were taking especially if you get endless stuff.
You're going to leave candles.
We are on Friday, but it's not like it's you're there. It's kind of like the endless thing where it's like media. And I even think like you're supposed to like even be sitting there with this idea of you're supposed to I don't know.
Take stills.
So there will be that one nugget of news, and you don't want to miss that. And you got to make sure that that
yes,
shared to all
I don't know what the setup was, but
what Farhad will know if Khamenei says, no, they haven't received an email, but then, Axios scooped the thing about the UAE envoy sending the trust letters to Khamenei, that kind of thing. So your question, your reporting will be informed by that, and you have to rely on that.
Basically, yeah, I think he was there to sort of emphasize
an incredible resource to have.
I think it's very funny if they're out there. The Orlando guys haven't seen anybody else. They're kind of at the Blair house. Okay. So they're like not seeing anybody in the cafeteria. So they're on the other side of the
Yeah, I think back in the day, I think there was a time